Opinion: Judicial accountability in India, a system in need of urgent reform to restore public trust in the judiciary. India must undertake sweeping reforms, including mandatory asset declarations, overturning judgments that shield judges from scrutiny, and empowering investigative agencies to act independently. Recent news reports alleging that unaccounted cash was found at the residence of Delhi High Court Judge Justice Yashwant Varma have once again brought the issue of judicial accountability into sharp focus. While the allegations remain unproven, they have reignited a long-standing debate about how India's judiciary deals with corruption within its ranks. Despite the gravity of such accusations, no Supreme Court or High Court judge in India has ever been impeached or convicted for corruption. This raises serious questions about the effectiveness of the existing mechanisms to address judicial misconduct and the need for systemic reforms to restore public confidence in the judiciary. The Constitution of India provides two primary avenues to hold judges accountable for corruption: an in-house procedure adopted by the Supreme Court, and an impeachment process conducted by the Parliament. However, both mechanisms have proven to be inadequate in addressing the problem. Legal experts argue that the lack of prosecutions and impeachments underscores the need for sweeping reforms, including revisiting Supreme Court judgments that shield judges from scrutiny and liberalizing India's stringent contempt of court laws that stifle public discourse on judicial corruption. The in-house procedure, introduced by the Supreme Court in 1999, is the first line of defense against allegations of judicial misconduct. Under this mechanism, complaints against High Court judges are addressed through an informal inquiry conducted by a three-member committee comprising 2 High Court Chief Justices and 1 judge. The process is designed to be confidential, with the accused judge given an opportunity to respond to the allegations. If the allegations are found to be serious, the judge is advised to resign. If they refuse, judicial work is withdrawn, and the Chief Justice of India may recommend impeachment. However, the in-house procedure has been criticized for its lack of transparency and effectiveness. The Supreme Court has ruled that inquiry reports under this mechanism are confidential, citing a 2003 judgment. As a result, the public remains unaware of the number of judges who have been discriminated against, and the actions taken against them. Between 2017 and 2021, the Union Law Ministry informed the Parliament that 1,631 complaints regarding judicial corruption had been received and forwarded to the Chief Justice of India or High Court Chief Justices. Yet, the outcomes of these complaints remain shrouded in secrecy. The recent case of Justice Shekhar Kumar Yadav of the Allahabad High Court illustrates the limitations of the in-house procedure. Yadav faced allegations of making communal remarks at a Vishva Hindu Parishad event held at the High Court in December 2023. While the Supreme Court Collegium initiated an in-house inquiry, the outcome remains unclear, and Yadav continues to serve as a judge. This lack of accountability erodes public trust in the judiciary and underscores the need for a more transparent and robust mechanism to address judicial misconduct. The impeachment process, outlined in the Constitution and the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968, is the second avenue to hold judges accountable. It allows the Parliament to remove a judge for proven misbehavior or incapacity. However, the process is fraught with political and procedural challenges. A removal motion requires the support of 100 Lok Sabha MPs or 50 Rajya Sabha MPs. If admitted, a 3-member judicial committee investigates the allegations. If misconduct is proven, the Parliament votes on the motion, requiring a 2/3 majority in both houses for the judge's removal. Despite its existence, the impeachment process has never resulted in the removal of a Supreme Court or High Court judge. In 1993, Justice V. Ramaswamy of the Supreme Court became the first judge to face an impeachment motion for allegedly misusing public funds. Although a judicial committee found him guilty on 11 of 14 charges, the removal motion failed in the Lok Sabha due to a lack of political will. Similarly, in 2009, an impeachment motion against Karnataka High Court Chief Justice P.D. Dinakaran was passed in the Rajya Sabha, but he resigned before the Lok Sabha could vote. In 2011, Justice Sumitra Sen of the Calcutta High Court also resigned before his impeachment motion could be taken up in the Lok Sabha. The failure to impeach even a single judge highlights the political and institutional barriers to holding judges accountable. The impeachment process, while constitutionally sound, is often undermined by partisan politics and the reluctance of lawmakers to take decisive action against members of the judiciary. Criminal prosecution of judges for corruption is even rarer. The Supreme Court's 1991 judgment in the K. Veeraswamy case established that judges are public servants under the Prevention of Corruption Act, but ruled that the CJI's advice is necessary before registering a criminal case or commencing prosecution against a judge. This requirement has created a significant barrier to prosecuting judges for corruption. There have been only a handful of instances where judges have faced criminal prosecution. In 2003, Justice Shamit Mukherjee of the Delhi High Court was charged under the Prevention of Corruption Act for allegedly colluding with officials to fix a case. In 2011, Justice Nirmal Yadav of the Punjab and Haryana High Court was charged after a bribe meant for her was mistakenly delivered to another judge. In 2017, Justice S.N. Shukla of the Allahabad High Court faced criminal charges for allegedly accepting a bribe to fix an order. However, all these cases remain pending, and none have resulted in convictions. The lack of convictions and impeachments underscores the urgent need for systemic reforms to address judicial corruption. Legal experts argue that the current mechanisms are inadequate and call for a rethinking of the options available to hold judges accountable. Alok Prasannakumar, co-founder of the Vitti Center for Legal Policy, emphasizes the need for greater transparency, such as mandatory asset declarations by judges. Currently, only about 13% of High Court judges have voluntarily disclosed their assets. Shubhankar Dam, a legal scholar, advocates for overturning Supreme Court judgments that shield judges from scrutiny, including the 1991 Veeraswamy judgment and the 1995 ruling that broadened the constitutional prohibition on discussing judges' conduct. Dam also highlights the need for operational independence for investigative agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation (CBI) to shield them from accusations of executive interference. However, he acknowledges that governments are unlikely to initiate reforms, as they benefit from the status quo. It is beneficial for governments not to investigate corruption allegations within the judiciary, he said. They can use them to control judges. The allegations against Justice Yashwant Varma are a stark reminder of the challenges India faces in addressing judicial corruption. The existing mechanisms, in-house procedure and the impeachment process have proven to be ineffective in holding judges accountable. The lack of transparency, political will, and operational independence for investigative agencies has created a system that is ill-equipped to tackle corruption within the judiciary. To restore public trust in the judiciary, India must undertake sweeping reforms. These include mandatory asset declarations, overturning judgments that shield judges from scrutiny, and empowering investigative agencies to act independently. Without such reforms, the judiciary risks losing its credibility, and the rule of law in India will remain compromised. The time for action is now. Nan the writer is a technocrat, political analyst, and author. He pens national, geopolitical, and social issues. His social media handle is Prasenjitunth. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Right Mind is the Waqf Board a religious institution or an arbitrary body? What was once a religious institution has morphed into a land-controlling powerhouse, operating with striking arbitrariness. The Waqf Board has long been sold as a sacred gig, mosques, graves, and Muslim charity, all wrapped in Sharia's iron grip. The 1995 Act handed it a holy mission: safeguard the faith's offerings, settle the squabbles. But it has swelled into a monstrous land hog, 9.4 lakh acres, often clashing with the railways and the government for turf. Arbitrary doesn't even cover it. The situation in Tamil Nadu is a stark example. The Waqf Board is laying claim to an entire village, including homes, fields, and a Hindu temple standing 1,500 years. Imagine a farmer, his life's work invested in his land, receiving a notice declaring his ancestral property now belongs to the Waqf with no recourse to the courts, only a tribunal seemingly predisposed to agree with the board. Section 40 of the current Waqf Act is the weapon. It allows them to claim any land on a whim, requiring no evidence, just a nod to some old tale. Hey race the truth, Waqf land isn't dodging India's law, it's just got a VIP ticket to run amok. The Act builds a fortress: disputes skip real courts, land and Waqf tribunals, stuffed with insiders who nod to the board. Section 6 shuts the door: no appeal, no independent oversight. It's not above the law, it's a privileged entity operating within it. Meanwhile, Hindu temples are tightly controlled, every rupee scrutinized, every trustee held accountable. Waqf, on the other hand, can lay claim to land based on little more than vague historical accounts, with the legal system offering limited recourse. Is it beyond India's constitutional framework? Not entire. Life Constitution remains supreme. Article 26 grants religious groups the right to manage their own affairs, yet the Waqf Board has far exceeded these bounds. Entire villages have been claimed, temple lands encroached upon, less an act of faith, more an assertion of unchecked power. The 2024 amendment marks a shift, placing district collectors over tribunals in an attempt to restore fairness. While some within the Muslim community see it as an erosion of autonomy, many Hindus view it as long overdue justice, a necessary step to curtail an institution that has expanded far beyond its intended role. Hindu temples such as those governed by Karnataka's 1997 Act are subject to state control, with even Muslims and Christians appointed to their boards. Their revenues are often diverted by the government, ostensibly for public welfare but frequently for political gains. Congress, in particular, mastered this approach, draining temple funds while offering token benefits to the masses. Waqf boards: the 1995 Act ensures they are strictly Muslim-run, with no space for outside oversight. Every position is reserved, bound by religious mandate. The 2024 amendment seeks to change that by opening leadership roles to non-Muslims, breaking a long-standing monopoly. The canonical law of Islam says a Waqf land giver must be Muslim, no compromise. Waqf is Allah's domain, and kafirs are outcasts. Yet, the current Waqf Act permits endowments from individuals of any faith, thanks to a 2013 amendment introduced by the Congress government, widely seen as a move to push Muslim appeasement to its peak. The 2024 bill reverses that, reinstating the principle that only practicing Muslims, with at least 5 years of prayer, can make such dedications. In countries like Turkey and Egypt, Waqf institutions have been significantly curtailed, their religious hold broken by the state. India, many argue, is long overdue for similar reforms, ensuring Hindus have a say in a system that has long affected their lands and heritage. To Muslims, Waqf is a crucial institution to Hindus. It represents unchecked power encroaching on ancestral property. If a Hindu waqf is unacceptable, then perhaps a Hindu overlord is the righteous fix to balance this lopsided fight. March 2025, and this fire's ablaze. What was once a religious institution has morphed into a land-controlling powerhouse, operating with striking arbitrariness. The Waqf Board is not beyond India's law, yet it has been granted privileges that leave Hindus struggling under state control. Now, with efforts to place Hindus in Waqf leadership and curb its unchecked expansion, tensions have spilled onto the streets. For many, this is not just about land, it is about reclaiming a sense of justice long denied. Muslims view it as an attack on their heritage, Hindus see it as an overdue correction to decades of imbalance. Both communities have their grievances, but while Muslims argue loss, Hindus have carried the burden of historical inequities. For them, it is time the scales finally tipped in their favor. Real-life cases continue to fuel Hindu outrage. In Tamil Nadu's Tiruchirappalli, the Waqf Board laid claim to 389 acres in Thirushendurai village, including the 1,500-year-old Sundareswarar Templi Kolara heritage site, sparking fury among locals with ancestral land deeds. A farmer, Rajagopal, found himself unable to sell his land without a Waqf NOC, prompting protests that led to a court-ordered stay in 2023. In Karnataka's Vijayapura, 1,200 acres of farmland near Hanwada village were marked as Waqf property in 2024, forcing farmers into a legal battle until authorities admitted it was a record error. Maharashtra's Ahmednagar saw a particularly absurd claim in 2006, when the Waqf Board attempted to take control of the ASI-protected Ahmed Shah tomb, resulting in a decade-long legal dispute. Meanwhile, in Delhi, metro expansion near Jama Masjid was stalled for 2 years in 2018 due to Waqf claims, costing Rs 200 crore and delaying critical infrastructure. Each of these cases has only deepened Hindu calls for justice. Moreover, the Waqf system has long functioned as an exclusive club. Scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, Pasmandas, and women have been largely excluded, denied a seat at the table. It has remained an elite-dominated institution, sidelining marginalist groups while maintaining a FAA of religious stewardship. The 2024 amendment seeks to change this, mandating representation for women, backward Muslims, and even non-Muslims, pushing Waqf towards greater transparency, inclusivity, and equity. For the first time, the system is being reshaped to ensure fairness rather than perpetuate entrenched hierarchies. This is not just reform, it is a long overdue reckoning. Waqf's unchecked authority, from claiming temples and villages to exerting influence over people's lives, has persisted for too long. The 2024 amendment is a crucial first step, but it must be enforced with stronger oversight, rigorous audits, and a thorough reassessment of its 9.4 lakh acres of land. History has been shaped by conquests, religious conflicts, and colonial interventions, but today's challenge is about securing justice for Bharat's future. Nanyavraj Pakarna is an independent journalist and columnist. He tweets with Eovraj Pakarna. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: Kashmir's peacelessness or PDP's irrelevance. The politics of perpetual victimhood. The Jammu and Kashmir Assembly should be a platform for socio-economic progress, yet it frequently devolves into an arena for politicizing irrelevant grievances. The Jammu and Kashmir Assembly is in session, meeting for the first time in 7 years. For years, local political leaders, particularly from the People's Democratic Party PDP and National Conference NC, decried the absence of elections as a democratic outrage. They took to the streets, held press conferences, and flooded social media with claims of disenfranchisement, insisting that the Kashmiri voice was being suppressed. Yet, when the government ensured peaceful and high-turnout elections in Jammu and Kashmir and the assembly convened, the spotlight has been on how they are using this platform. Instead of addressing urgent issues like unemployment, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and the economy, certain legislators turned the assembly into a spectacle, a stage for grandstanding rather than a forum for crafting and voting on meaningful policies. In one recent session, a PDP legislator, Wahidur Ramanpara, stood up and declared that Kashmir is peaceful, but Kashmiris are peaceless. With the tone of an exasperated parent lecturing a restless child, he spoke at length about repression, alienation, and suffering, exhausting the dictionary of grievances. His remarks raise a critical question: who is responsible for this supposed peacelessness? Is it the Indian government, as he implied, or the political elite including his party that has governed Kashmir for decades, perpetuating strife and aggravating the plight of its people? Founded in 1999 with the promise of a healing touch, the PDP once inspired hope that it would bridge the gap between Delhi and Srinagar, end violence, and curb the mismanagement of Kashmir-centric political parties. History, however, tells a different story. Some of the region's worst security crises happened under the PDP rule. Between 2015 and 2018, during its rule in Jammu and Kashmir, Kashmir saw a decade-high surge in terrorist recruitment. Stone-pelting protests became an organized phenomenon, with Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence ISI reportedly fueling it as an industry. Today, the PDP laments the imprisonment of 5,000 Kashmiri youth, conveniently ignoring that during their tenure, many stone-pelters were detained under the Public Safety Act PSA, a law they now criticize. For instance, in 2016, official records indicate that 525 individuals were detained under the PSA, although media reports suggest higher figures. If these young people were truly victims of unjust incarceration, why didn't the PDP repeal the PSA when they had the chance? If today's political prisoners are wrongfully punished, why did the PDP itself imprison people under the same laws? The reality is that those arrests were not baseless, they were necessary responses to the deliberate chaos that the PDP and similar parties allowed to fester. Their current outrage isn't about justice, it's about self-serving politics. A curious and complex feature of political activity in Kashmir is the behavior of leaders who seem to adopt opposing personas depending on whether they are in government or in the opposition. This gap is more than just political cynicism, it betrays a deliberate scheme to capture sentiment, invoke complaints, and oversimplify the relevance of the political class. One of the most revealing examples of political opportunism is the People's Democratic Party, or PDP. Its eclectic leadership cultivates a pietistic image of self-restraint in the name of preserving peace and at the same time, while in power, taking harsh measures against protests, severe arrests, and using draconian laws as they call them now during busybody political activism. But after losing elections, they try to transform themselves into ardent advocates of democracy and human rights, ignoring their previous records with glee. Consider Mehbooba Mufti's case. While her administration exercised a highly authoritarian response during the protests that followed Burhan Wani's killing in 2016, she claimed after the fact that it was all in the name of democratic behavior. The cudgel was let loose, and as she failed as the chief minister and home minister of the then state of JK, over 525 people were detained under the Public Safety Act, which her party had previously passed. In addition, over 12,000 youths were arrested across the territories of Kashmir, most of them violators of the law but many of them innocent onlookers. Along with curfews came shutting down the internet, with armed forces operating without oversight. But when civilian casualties were brought up, she made that infamous statement alongside then Home Minister Rajnath Singh, "Did those children go to army camps to buy toffees?" The insensitivity of this remark was appalling, but at that moment, it served her political purpose to justify the heavy-handed response of her own government. Fast forward to today, and Mehbooba Mufti and her party legislators are singing a completely different tune. She portrays herself as a victim, condemns the very laws she once used, and demands the release of prisoners, many of whom were jailed under her own rule. Suddenly, the same security forces she defended are now oppressors. The same judiciary that she relied upon is now biased. The same laws that her government used with impunity are now draconian. This duplicity isn't unique to Mehbooba Mufti alone. It is a pattern among Kashmir's traditional political elite. They play by one rule when in power and another when out of it. Their approach to governance is dictated not by principles but by political convenience. Equally troubling in the assembly was the legislators' attempt to divorce Kashmir's political reality from its actual needs, aligning it with Pakistani propaganda. He spoke of a muted Kashmiri voice, and political oppression, and even hinted at Pakistan's supposed superpower status on Kashmir issues. These claims are not spontaneous, they echo a long-standing effort by some JK political factions to blur the line between legitimate governance and separatist sympathies. Too often, elected Kashmiri leaders ignore their constituents' aspirations and instead amplify Pakistan's narrative. The JK Assembly should be a platform for socio-economic progress, yet it frequently devolves into an arena for politicizing irrelevant grievances. While Kashmiris grapple with poverty, unemployment, and crumbling infrastructure, some legislators prefer to peddle narratives of repression rather than tackle substantive issues. Why isn't the Assembly debating investments, jobs, education, or healthcare? Don't the elected representatives of JK see roads, schools, hospitals, and industries as priorities worth pursuing, rather than slogans that keep Kashmir mired in perpetual conflict? The legislator who spoke so confidently about Kashmiri's peacelessness should first reflect on his record. What has he delivered for his constituents till now? Has he created jobs for the youth, improved infrastructure, or contributed to the region's development in any positive way? The answer to this is a resounding no. Kashmiris aren't peaceless, they are exhausted. Exhausted by leaders who, instead of offering relief, deepen their misery. Exhausted by a political elite that has mastered the art of evading accountability. Contrast this with recent progress. Since 2019, Kashmir has attracted over Rs 56,000 crore in investment, transforming a violence-ridden region into an emerging economic hub. Border terrorism is at an all-time low, and young Kashmiris now have the chance to pursue careers rather than live in fear. Border terrorism has been converted into border tourism, a source of livelihood for hundreds of youth. Stone pelting has gone, schools, colleges, business establishments remain open throughout the year, a phenomenon that is seen for the first time after 1990. This shift threatens the relevance of parties like the PDP, who thrive on conflict and instability. In a thriving Kashmir, their politics of victimhood lose their grip. The legislator's speech was not about the people of Kashmir, it was about reviving a dying political class. It was an attempt to resurrect the politics of manufactured grievance because peace is a liability, not an asset for these parties. In Kashmir, where people are working, studying, and building their futures, who has time for despairing speeches? If these politicians genuinely believe Kashmiris are peaceless, they should first answer what did they do for Kashmir when they held power? Why are they remembered only for their failures? Until they confront these questions, their rhetoric will remain what it has always been, a desperate bid to stay relevant in a Kashmir that has moved beyond their politics. Mudassir Dar is a social and peace activist based in South Kashmir. He received a Rashtrapati Award and has contributed to many local and national publications on a diverse range of topics, including national security, politics, governance, peace, and conflict. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion. India's moment is not on the horizon, it's here and now. India's youth and diaspora are a formidable force driving innovation, entrepreneurship, and cultural influence worldwide. The story of modern India is not written in straight lines. It loops and swirls like an intricate Piquet painting, much like the one artisan in Rajasthan almost abandoned before finding new life in international galleries. It unfolds in flashes of light, sometimes the neon glow of an entrepreneur's first office, sometimes the burning torch of an Olympic dream. It moves to the rhythm of a tabla in a Mumbai auditorium, to the hum of a server room in Bengaluru, to the roar of the world's largest cricket stadium in Ahmedabad. It is a story that defies expectations, just like India itself. To understand where India stands now is to embrace its contradictions. It is a country brimming with young, ambitious minds. Over 50% of our 1.4 billion people are under the age of 30, driving change in business, sports, and the arts. Yet, it also remains a land of deep contrasts, where world-class urban infrastructure coexists with rural communities still striving for basic amenities. It is a nation of immense opportunity, yet one that must address economic inequality. This duality, the tension between aspiration and reality, was at the heart of the India Conference at Harvard, an annual global platform that examines India's business, policy, and cultural trajectory. For over 2 decades, this student-driven initiative has brought together some of the most influential voices shaping India's future. Among them this year was Nita Ambani, whose presence reflected not just corporate success but a deep personal commitment to India's evolution. At Harvard, the chairperson of the Reliance Foundation spoke not only of India's achievements but of responsibility, the responsibility to build institutions that endure, to create opportunities that uplift, and to champion a vision of India that is as inclusive as it is ambitious. What caught my attention first was how Nita Ambani navigated a SWOT analysis of India. Strength: our youth and our Indian diaspora, a formidable force driving innovation, entrepreneurship, and cultural influence worldwide. Weakness: the 200 million plus people at the bottom whose lives we need to change in the next decade, a reminder of the urgent need to bridge inequalities and ensure inclusive growth. Opportunity: the adoption of technology at scale, whether in artificial intelligence, green energy, or genomics, presenting India with the chance to lead in industries of the future. Threat: wars. Speaking as a mother, she stressed the need for peace in the world not just as a political or economic imperative, but as a moral responsibility for the sake of humanity, growth, and prosperity. A more precise SWOT analysis of India 2025 would be tough to pen down. And it comes from someone who exemplifies the spirit of modern India. Nita Ambani's words carried the weight of someone who understands that sustainable progress cannot be achieved in a world divided by conflict. She also spoke of how technological advancements must be harnessed to uplift lives, ensuring that innovations are accessible and beneficial to all sections of society. Moreover, the emphasis on the youth resonated deeply with the country standing at the threshold of a demographic dividend. Her belief in empowering young minds through quality education, mentorship, and skill development highlights the potential for India's youth to become global leaders and changemakers. Equally, her acknowledgement of the Indian diaspora as a strength underscores their role as cultural ambassadors, economic contributors, and advocates for India on the global stage. Her perspective on peace as a mother, rather than merely a business leader, was a poignant reminder that true prosperity is possible only when humanity prioritizes dialogue over discord. Her insights served as both a reflection of India's present realities and a vision for its future, one rooted in resilience, innovation, and the pursuit of collective well-being. Nita Ambani's work spanning education, sports, culture, healthcare, and philanthropy is a testament to the power of institutions in shaping societies. She has been instrumental in creating spaces where talent is nurtured, traditions are preserved, and excellence is not a privilege but an expectation. At the heart of her philosophy lies an unshakable belief in passion and purpose, 2 words she often invokes when speaking about building institutions. I just love what I do. I think there's magic in it, she says, and the institutions she has built exemplify her conviction. The institutions range from the Dhirubhai Ambani International School, ranking as India's top international school, to the most successful IPL franchise, Mumbai Indians, and a world-class institution dedicated to the promotion of Indian and global arts, the Nita Mukesh Ambani Cultural Centre NMAC. The NMAC has quickly become a cultural landmark, providing a platform for artistic expression and fostering cross-cultural dialogue. And then there is her determined bid to bring the Olympics to India in 2036. I believe that India must have the Olympics. We are going to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. And if you are in the 10 largest economies of the world, 9 countries have hosted the Olympics. Only India has not, and I find that really odd, she remarked during the India conference at Harvard, also underlining the fact that India is ready to host the most sustainable games till date. Nita Ambani's work, whether in education, sports, or culture, is deeply aligned with the larger transformation that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership has ushered in, a transformation reinforcing a national ethos that values innovation, inclusion, and excellence. Nita Ambani continues to champion causes that resonate with the government's vision of a self-reliant and culturally vibrant India. Her contributions across sectors are a testament to the transformative power of purpose-driven leadership in shaping the nation's future. None of this is to suggest that India's path forward is without challenges. Dhirubhai Ambani once said, "If you don't build your dream, someone else will hire you to build theirs." Nita Ambani has taken that philosophy and applied it to something far greater than business. She has built institutions that will shape India for generations to come. As I reflect on her words at Harvard, I realize that her vision is not just about the future, it is about ensuring that India's moment is not something we wait for, but something we seize. The India she speaks of, the India she helps build, is not on the horizon. It is here. It is now. A columnist and author, Sandeep Bhutoria is passionate about the environment, education, and wildlife conservation. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Book Review: Kathmandu Chronicle, How India and Nepal Can Reclaim Their Relations. The book reinforces the belief that a stronger Nepal is not just good for itself, but equally good for India and for maintaining peace in South Asia. Nepal has always fascinated me. Whether it is the grandeur of its Durbar squares, mysteries of its temples, its natural endowments, its customs and traditions like worshipping of the living goddess, its valiant history, or on the flip side, devastating earthquakes and floods, plane hijacking of 1999, palace massacre of 2001, and its topsy-turvy relationship with India, the erstwhile Hindu kingdom rarely ceases my consciousness. Being a geopolitics aficionado, I also keenly observe Nepal's role in South Asia. Thus, in my last visit to Kathmandu, I picked up an engrossing book on India-Nepal relationship, Kathmandu Chronicle: Reclaiming India-Nepal Relations. It's been jointly authored by Krishna V. Rajan, India's longest-serving ambassador to Nepal till date and later an advisor to the Indian government on Nepal matters, and Atul K. Thakur, a credible Indian voice on Nepal today. The authors make the book's focus adequately clear through its title and subtitle. The latter points to the fact that both sides have been harboring some misgivings, in spite of social and cultural commonalities, which warrant correction. So, the book doesn't just diagnose the ailment, but also prescribes treatment. Kathmandu Chronicle is divided into 3 sections. The first one presents personal experiences and work of Rajan as a diplomat in Kathmandu. The second section focuses on Nepal's struggle for democracy. It goes on to expound India's interventions in this journey of Nepal and skepticism on part of both for one another. While the first 2 sections deal with the causes of mutual distrust between the two nations, the final part offers hope for recovering the relationship in disarray by recommending to focus on flood management, hydropower potential, preferential trade agreements and tourism promotion. The authors advocate for citizen-centric development with emphasis on health, education, skilling, and livelihoods. They also suggest that connectivity infrastructure such as the Trans-Himalayan Economic Corridor may be prioritized to repurpose the relationship. A recurring recommendation in the book for Indian policymakers and diplomats is treating Nepal as an equal partner. Unlike most books on the subject written by Indians in which Nepal's political class gets solely blamed for tensions in the bilateral relationship, Rajan and Thakur have been neutral to the extent possible in their assessment of India-Nepal relationship. They have comprehensively dealt with Kathmandu's approach and suggested what it needs to do for better diplomatic outcomes. They say that the current foreign policy of the Himalayan country is chaotic and lacking vision. At the same time, they have been frank in pointing out flaws in New Delhi's ways and recommended corrective steps. For them, while Nepal needs to appreciate India's geopolitical compulsions, India needs to fully understand Nepal's yearning for equality and sovereign space. The role of Indian bureaucracy vis-a-vis Nepal has also been scrutinized in depth, and the fault lines emerging due to the pettiness of the Indian bureaucratic mindset have been dealt with elaborately. The writers go on to add that the inability or unwillingness of senior bureaucrats to suggest alternative, or more moderate options to their political bosses has been a reason for many diplomatic flashpoints between the two countries. They urge the Indian policymakers to try a new policy of strengthening democracies as well as civil society engagement for regional good. The book acknowledges the China card that has often been played by those in power in Nepal to counterbalance India's influence on the country. Though it has mostly been rhetorical than strategic, the China factor can't be ignored for any recalibration in India-Nepal relations. So, the book gives substantial space to China's growing footsteps in Nepal. Beijing has now openly started interfering in Nepal's internal matters, deploying its wolf warrior diplomatic approach. Still, China is romanticized by Nepali politicians and intellectuals, and considered a benevolent neighbor. On the other hand, they consider India as a difficult and interfering country. The book notes that it is this perception that needs to be set right, and both countries have a role to play in this. The book also stresses on the role of the United States to maintain balance in South Asia. Not many works give a vivid description of the inhabitants of the Narayan Hiti Palace, as available in Kathmandu Chronicle. One gets to significantly understand King Birendra, Queen Aishwarya, Crown Prince later King Dipendra and Prince later King Gyanendra by reading this book. I got especially moved by knowing the dilemmas and challenges that King Birendra had to tackle. These were shared by the king himself to Rajan, courtesy their personal rapport. The coverage of reasons leading to the unfortunate royal massacre is another aspect that makes the book stand apart. Rajan reveals that Birendra had an inkling about the looming threat to his life when he told him that I have my enemies. I am in the way of what they want to achieve. The book is rich with copious quotes from statesmen and intellectuals, and is a fascinating read because of its in-depth analysis of political developments in Nepal in the last few decades. It discusses the problems King Birendra faced at home and as a monarch, the political situation that changed swiftly after his gory assassination and altered Nepal's very identity as a Hindu country, as well as the challenges the country continues to grapple with as it transitions from a monarchy to a democracy. The book offers solutions to reboot the relationship between India and Nepal by making a case for economic cooperation, regional integration, and people-centric progress. It hopes that a revolutionary resolve from both sides will pave the way. Kathmandu Chronicle reinforced my belief that a stronger Nepal is not just good for itself, but equally good for India and for maintaining peace in South Asia. So, India must make Nepal its companion as it writes its growth story. Wherever possible, it may consider granting concessions to Nepal that help regain the trust. If there is only one source you want to access to better your understanding of the relationship between the two Hindu-majority nations, then this is the one. Shashvat Singh is a public policy analyst and sustainability consultant. The views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's view. Dharma files from Ram Mandir to come, political Hinduism making big strides forward. One can safely predict that these developments, taken together, are bound to produce some major consequences in the future within a decade. Although it is difficult to foresee what shape it might take, it seems to me that some developments have taken place in India over the past few years, which are going to have long-term consequences, especially for political Hinduism. I list 4 of them here. I might have expressed my views on some of them earlier, but the time might be ripe to make a consolidated assessment. The first of these is the inauguration of the Ram Temple on January 22, 2024. It made the news cycle in a big way at the time. However, when the BJP failed to win a key parliamentary seat in that area during the national elections of 2024, it began to be thought that the impact of the Ram Temple might have been exaggerated. Subsequent developments, however, seem to confirm its long-lasting influence. The electoral victory of the BJP, in a subsequent polls, however, might be a more solid indication of its impact. Moreover, if it is true that now more people are visiting the Ram Temple than the Taj Mahal, then this fact tells its own story. The second is the developments in Bangladesh. It is true that the developments in Bangladesh are an internal matter for that country, but the persistent accounts of the persecution of the Hindus in Bangladesh ever since the ouster of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on August 5, 2024, are bound to have transnational impact. The divergent trajectories of the minority populations of Hindus in Pakistan and Bangladesh, where it has been diminishing over the years, and that of the Muslim minority in India, where it has been increasing, cannot remain unnoticed for long. The chief explanation of the decline of the Hindu minorities in Pakistan and Bangladesh is most probably conversion, and that of the rise of Muslim minority in India is demographic growth. These distinctions, however, are likely to be lost in the face of the obvious contrast in the destinies of the minorities in these countries. The third factor to consider is the blockbuster success of such movies as the Kashmir Files and the Kerala Files. The display of Hindu suffering at the hands of the Muslims must have made some impression on the huge audiences which have viewed them. The recent success of the film Chhava, which depicts in gruesome detail the torture of Samhaj, son of Shivaji, at the hands of Aurangzeb, belongs to the same category. The reader might wish to recall that the political success of the DMK in Tamil Nadu is known to have been preceded by the cinematization of its ideology. Finally, the figures of attendance at the Kumbh Mela are staggering. According to the latest figure, about 660 million people are supposed to have participated in it. This means that 1 out of every 2 Hindus in India has been there. Lest this figure appear too sensational, let us recall that India's current population is estimated to be around 1.4 billion, out of which 200 million are Muslims. The Hindu population of India is estimated to be about 1.2 billion, half of which comes to 600 million. It might be helpful to recall that Mahatma Gandhi is supposed to have influenced 1 Indian in 200. All these developments are in some measure directly or indirectly related to Hindu identity and to its strengthening. One can safely predict that these developments, taken together, are bound to produce some major consequences in the future within a decade, although it is difficult to foresee what shape it might take. The collective impact of these developments would be inescapable for good or ill. The author, formerly in the IAS, is the Burks Professor of Comparative Religion at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where he has taught for over 30 years. He has also taught in Australia and the US and at Nalanda University. He has published extensively in the fields of Indian and world religions. The views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's view. Opinion. Justice Varma scandal taking judicial autonomy too far. The time has come to move towards an open justice. A great democracy such as ours deserves this. The fire in a judge's home has not only torched the reputation of its occupant, a sitting Delhi High Court judge, but is in danger of blackening the credibility of the judiciary. One would have thought that the discovery of cash, much, if not all of it, allegedly unaccounted for, would have caused the Chief Justice of India CJI to hold an open and eminently transparent inquiry. But that didn't happen. What we got was an inexplicable decision. The Supreme Court Collegium, the CJI'd 5-judge highest decision-making body of the apex court, transferred Justice Varma back to his parent court, the Allahabad High Court. A move that greatly agitated the Allahabad High Court Bar Association, which within hours, in a break from the norm, wrote a stinker to the Supreme Court asking it not to treat it like a trash can, an ostensible dumping ground for tarnished judges. The seeming attempt by the Supreme Court at brushing the matter under the carpet prompted a withering public backlash. Perhaps, aware that the Collegium's action wasn't going to fly, the Chief Justice of India swiftly sought to control the damage by ordering an in-house inquiry. The CJI also derosteered the judge. Additionally, the Chief Justice of India posted a series of videos on the Apex Court's official website of the burnt currency notes recovered from Justice Varma's home. This act virtually ruined Justice Varma's case. Yet, we shouldn't breathe easy. An in-house probe is nowhere near enough. The discovery at Justice Varma's home was in public glare, so the inquiry should have been 2. Second, how can judges be judging judges? As the sexist axiom goes, Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. Surely, this in-house inquiry panel is a travesty in the making. What if Justice Varma is let off, even if it is for compelling reasons? The outcome will never be above suspicion. Justice must be done, but must also be seen to be done. Unfortunately, the lurch towards opacity is not out of character. Believe it or not, judges in this great democracy of ours appoint themselves. The SC Collegium publishes no eligibility criteria and no reasoning for appointing, promoting, transferring, or dropping judges. Worse, the SC has struck down well-considered legislation designed to bring about transparency in judicial appointments in line with the best practices existent in all other major democracies. The ostensible reason for striking down any reform is to maintain institutional autonomy. But when other democratic nations can maintain an equilibrium, India can too. Surely. More crucially, the judiciary also exempts itself from any stipulation that mandates the compulsory declaration of assets. As of 2024, only 98 of 749 High Court judges have declared their net asset worth. Imagine. Would any other Indian citizen be able to claim such an exemption? The exemption can't stay. What's the guarantee that judges aren't being bought? How does one eliminate the possibility of a conflict of interest? In 2007, the Central Information Commission (CIC) ruled that details of judges' asset declarations should be disclosed under the Right to Information (RTI) Act, 2005. The Supreme Court's Central Public Information Officer (CPIO) challenged this ruling in the Delhi High Court in 2009. In 2010, the Delhi High Court upheld the CIC order, affirming that the information about asset declarations by judges is not exempt from disclosure. Astoundingly, the Supreme Court, however, appealed the decision, delaying the full implementation of asset transparency. Why is there something to hide? The higher judiciary has made such a virtue out of institutional autonomy that it has turned into a veritable judicial autarky. A parallel state beyond the citizen's gaze. The time has come to move towards an open justice. A great democracy such as ours deserves this. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion tyrants and religious bigots cannot be eulogized. The controversy over Aurangzeb's tomb isn't just about a monument, it's about confronting a brutal past and rejecting the glorification of such figures in modern India. History is a contentious topic in India and is inextricably intertwined with our daily lives. It is never far from the surface, waiting to break out into the open at the slightest provocation. There are myriad historical monuments interspersed across the Countryan cities, towns, and villages that confront us daily and continuously remind us either of the evils of a different time or the grandeur of a bygone era. One such monument is the tomb of Aurangzeb, located in Koltabad near Samhajinagar, previously known as Aurangabad in Maharashtra, which has become the subject of a current controversy, even sparking deadly riots in Nagpur. To comprehend the present controversy, we need to understand who Aurangzeb really was. Was he truly a great ruler worthy of veneration, as some claim, or was he an unapologetic tyrant and religious despot who should have no place of honor in modern secular India? Aurangzeb was the sixth Mughal emperor, reigning from 1658 to 1707. While he expanded the Mughal Empire to arguably its greatest extent, his rule was marked by inhuman brutality, conservatism, and stark religious bigotry. I will highlight some of his crimes, so egregious and horrendous that anyone and everyone should feel embarrassed to defend him. He was the epitome of religious intolerance. He reimposed jizya on Hindus, banned the celebration of the Parsi festival of Nowruz, prohibited the playing of music, and encouraged the forcible conversion of Hindus and Sikhs. The persecution of non-Muslims was a prominent feature of his governance. In 1675, Guru Tegh Bahadur, the ninth Guru of the Sikhs, was arrested by Mughal officials when he sought to protect 500 Kashmiri Pandits who were being forced to convert to Islam. To break his will, 3 of his disciples were cruelly tortured and killed before his eyes in a gruesome manner. One was cut in half by a saw, another was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil, and a third was chopped to pieces. But Guru Teg Bahadur did not relent. He was publicly beheaded in Chandni Chowk, and his severed head was paraded through the streets as an example to those who opposed forcible conversion. This sadistic streak appears repeatedly in Aurangzeb's life. Describing the brutal torture of the Maratha king Samhaj, the subject of the recent film Chhava, the great historian Jagannath Sarkar writes in History of Aurangzeb Orient Longman, 1912, that very night, his eyes were blinded, and the next day, the tongue of Kavi Kailash was cut out. The Muhammadan theologians pronounced a decree that Shamhuji should be put to death on account of his having slain, captured, and dishonored Muslims and plundered the cities of Islam. The emperor, seeing no chance of getting anything out of Shamhuji, consented to his death. After undergoing a fortnight of torture and insult, the captives were removed to the imperial camp at Khorjaon, on the bank of the Bhima, and there they were put to a cruel and painful death on March 11, their limbs being hacked off one by one and their flesh thrown to the dogs. Their severed heads were stuffed with straw and exhibited in all the chief cities of the Deccan to the accompaniment of drum and trumpet. Aurangzeb's ill deeds were not confined to targeting personalities alone, they had a broader intent: the annihilation of Hinduism as a whole. Accordingly, in September 1669, he ordered the destruction of the Vishwanath temple in Varanasi, the holiest of Hindu temples, and built a mosque over it. However, parts of the original temple were retained and remain visible even today, nearly 300 years after the end of Mughal rule and 75 years after a predominantly Hindu government was established, standing as constant reminders of the humiliation, hurt, and agony endured by Hindus. The present Kashi Vishwanath temple was built by Rani Ahilyabai Holkar, the Queen of Indore, in 1777, adjacent to the original site. Aurangzeb also demolished another sacred Hindu site, the Kesavadeo temple in Mathura, and replaced it with an Eidgah. These acts of destruction committed by Aurangzeb are not fantasies conjured up by the Hindu right wing, as some claim, but established historical facts, supported by irrefutable evidence. Mazir Alamgiri is an authorized account of Aurangzeb's rule. Written by Saki Mustad Khan, a contemporary of Aurangzeb. It was completed in 1710, 3 years after Aurangzeb's death, and later translated into English by Jagannath Sarkar, the renowned Indian historian. On page 55, Saki Mustad Khan states it was reported that, according to the emperor's command, his officers had demolished the temple of Viswanath at Kashi. Even the rabidly anti-Hindutva historian Audrey Trushkeen, otherwise enthusiastic cheerleader for Aurangzeb, is forced to acknowledge this crime in her book The Man and the Myth. Aurangzeb brought the bulk of Benares Vishwanatha temple down in 1669. The Gyanvapi Masjid still stands today in Benares with part of the ruined temple's wall incorporated into the building. To grasp the gravity of his crimes, let us summarize what Aurangzeb did. Here was a ruler who publicly beheaded the supreme spiritual leader of the Sikhs, tortured a popular king to death, and razed the holiest sites of Hindus to the ground. These are cardinal sins with no parallel. No other religion would have tolerated such atrocities had they been inflicted upon them. However, the prevailing narrative has long been that Hindu sensibilities can be trampled upon with no consequence. Whatever supposed good deeds Aurangzeb may have done cannot absolve him of these gravest of crimes. One wonders whether there can be any limit to a human being's diabolicality. Can such a person be worthy of veneration? That is the million-dollar question that all right-thinking Indians, including Muslims, need to introspect on. Can present-day Muslims be held accountable for the misdeeds of medieval Muslim invaders? The answer is a categorical no. They are not guilty per se. However, when Muslims defend these historical atrocities and protest to preserve the status quo, they not only align themselves with the perpetrator but also with the vile deeds themselves. In effect, they knowingly and deliberately accept responsibility for the crimes of medieval Muslim invaders. It is this polarizing activism and domineering mindset that has vitiated the socio-political climate, which makes them culpable in current times. People who claim that Aurangzeb is no longer relevant or urge us to forget the past are making a fatal error and oversight that will leave us vulnerable, making us easy prey for the same predatory forces that once sought to annihilate us. This is not paranoia. The exodus of Hindus from Kashmir, where they were driven out of their homes in a supposedly Hindu-majority India, the steady trickle of Hindus fleeing Pakistan, and the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in Bangladesh following Sheikh Hasina's exit are constant reminders of the threats facing our pluralistic society, particularly the Hindus of the subcontinent. It is therefore imperative that barbaric tyrants and religious bigots are not glorified, so that their memory does not encourage and perpetuate more evil. What should be done with Aurangzeb's tomb? This decision should be left to its custodians and the Muslim community. It is a test for the community to decide what they will choose: secularism in line with the pluralism of modern India or the religious bigotry and Muslim domination of medieval times. However, one thing must be made clear: it can no longer remain a monument under the protection of the ACI, nor can it continue as a public monument to be exhibited and revered. Nan the writer is a use-based author. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely that of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS 18's views. Nan. Opinion: from malnutrition to medication eliminating TB in a systematic way, community engagement and public awareness remain crucial in reducing stigma and ensuring patients seek timely care. Let's begin the article with the story of a 52-year-old homemaker from a small village in Odisha. She would work tirelessly, managing her home, assisting in the fields, and caring for her grandchildren. Despite her relentless dedication, she often prioritized her family's needs over her own, leading to neglect of her health. When a free tuberculosis TB screening camp arrived in her village, she hesitated, believing she was merely fatigued from her daily chores. However, attending the camp revealed she had TB. This diagnosis shocked her, especially since she exhibited no typical symptoms like a persistent cough or fever. Health workers explained that her undernutrition had compromised her immune system, making her more susceptible to infections like TB. Fortunately, through the government's 100-day intensified TB elimination campaign, she promptly began treatment and received monthly nutritional support, aiding her recovery. The story highlights the strong link between malnutrition and TB. Undernourishment weakens immunity, increasing TB risk, while TB worsens malnutrition by causing weight loss and deficiencies. In India, malnutrition contributes to nearly 50% of TB cases, with 35% of patients underweight at diagnosis. The NFHS 5 reports that 1 in 3 children under 5 is undernourished, raising their future TB risk. Nikshay Poshan Yojana has improved the nutrition of TB patients. However, expanding dietary support, micronutrient programs, and community-led feeding initiatives can further strengthen recovery and treatment adherence. Early detection remains pivotal in controlling TB transmission. Using molecular diagnostic tools like SPNATE cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test and improved accessibility to healthcare facilities can significantly enhance early case detection. Expanding these services to the grassroots level, particularly in high-burden districts, will accelerate TB control efforts. AI-based chest X-ray screening tools, such as QXR and CAD4TB, are now used in high-burden states to speed up TB detection. Portable molecular diagnostic kits deployed in remote areas are improving access to early testing. Expanding these technologies will help detect TB faster and more accurately, reducing transmission. TB costs India 32 billion annually in lost productivity in healthcare. A 2024 WHO report highlights that every one invested in TB care yields 43 in economic benefits. Increased funding isn't just a health need, it's an economic imperative. Eradicating TB requires a joint effort between the government, private sector, and civil society. The Jindal Foundation's partnership with Nikshay Mitra is a key example of providing nutritional support to TB patients in Odisha, Chhattisgarh, and Jharkhand. This initiative has helped 5,400 patients recover and become TB-free, reinforcing the power of collaborative action. Systematic intervention transforms TB care in India via the 100-day intensified TB elimination campaign. Spearheaded by the Prime Minister, this initiative revolutionizes TB care by reducing mortality and incidence across 347 high-burden districts. It is not just another initiative, it represents a complete transformation of India's TB strategy, powered by cutting-edge diagnostic tools and robust community participation. High-sensitivity screening and diagnostic tools are being deployed across 455 campaign districts to tackle the challenge of TB. The active case finding ACF model ensures that no case goes unnoticed, utilizing door-to-door screenings powered by Nikshay Vahans, equipped with portable X-ray machines and molecular diagnostic tools NAAT. The campaign has already screened over 11 crore vulnerable individuals, and over 6 lakh tuberculosis patients nationwide have been notified, demonstrating the efficacy of this proactive approach. Ensuring treatment adherence is another crucial pillar in the fight against TB. Non-adherence to TB treatment is a major barrier to eradication, often leading to multi-drug-resistant TB (MDR-TB). A patient-centric approach integrating directly observed treatment, short course dots with digital adherence technologies like 99DOTS and community health work-world interventions can improve compliance rates and long-term recovery. Community-based models play a key role in TB elimination. In Madhya Pradesh, an ASHA work-world program increased TB detection by 28% in 1 year. State policies like Tamil Nadu's TB task force show how cross-sector partnerships can strengthen TB care. Expanding these efforts will accelerate India's goal of ending TB by 2025. Community engagement and public awareness remain crucial in reducing stigma and ensuring patients seek timely care. Large-scale behavior change communication (BCC) campaigns, community health worker engagement, and integrating TB awareness into school curricula can significantly improve health-seeking behaviors and help curb the spread of the disease. Dr. K. Madan Gopal is a health systems expert and works as advisor of the Public Health Administration at the National Health Systems Resource Centre (NHSRC), MOHFW, Government of India. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS 18's views. Nan. Opinion. Civilizational state, or civilizational nation, which best describes India. Merely being a civilization does not guarantee a nation-state's elevation to the level of a civilization state. All civilization states are nation-states, but the converse is not true in recent years. Since 2014, to be more specific, terms like civilizational state or civilization state have gradually become part of public discourse across large sections of the Indian mainstream and social media. In July 2014, renowned Indologist Dr. Konrad Elst used the term civilization state in a blog post titled India as a Civilization State, arguing for the need to rethink the identity of the Indian Republic as a civilization state. In 2021, advocate and author J. Sai Deepak explored the concept of Indian civilization and the civilizational state at length in his book India That is Bharat Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution Bloomsbury, 2021. Last week, while answering a question on the Lex Fridman podcast, Prime Minister Narendra Modi described India as a millennia-old civilization. This statement sparked an animated discussion on social media, where some people, including journalists, went on to assert that the Prime Minister had characterized India as a civilizational state. But did he really do so? To many of us, the term civilizational civilization state represents a rather vague concept. Often, we tend to apply the term quite loosely in writing or in speech, sometimes merely to sound cool before an audience. Many Indians end up confounding it with the Sanskrit term Rashtra, and sometimes with the European term nation, clearly oblivious of either term's conceptual frameworks and historical underpinnings. Sometimes we are just unable to define the idea behind these technical terms in clear, coherent words, largely because our woolly thinking hasn't been refined through appropriate training in navigating, interpreting, or carrying out critical historico-philosophical ways of thinking. In this brief reflection, I shall explore the ideas embodied in terms like civilizational state, civilization state, and civilizational nation. Hopefully, this will help shed some of the baggage of confusion and conceptual problems that these terms have put on, due to their uncritical circulation in the popular discourses of our country for over a decade now. A nation is a people united by shared cultural practices and political aspirations, though not necessarily bound to a fixed geographical area at all times. For instance, monotheistic faith-based nations may have clearly defined objectives of political expansion or the reclamation of long-lost political power and sovereignty. Over time, it is natural for such a people to develop traditions and establish institutions, whether religious or theological, social and moral, political and administrative, legal, juridical, economic, industrial, educational, or artistic, aesthetic. At a fundamental level, all these institutions embody the peculiar cultural practices and the specific socio-political aspirations of that nation and enforce them whenever these practices and aspirations are at risk of being violated by elements internal or external. When these institutions collectively embodying and enforcing the shared cultural practices and political aspirations of the nation ripen through an unbroken, continuous existence in time, and grow a kind of resilience through varied temporal and worldly experiences, they give rise to a civilization. For various aspects of a culture, the process of continuously existing and surviving through time using resilience acquired on the way can be named tradition or, sometimes, custom. A tradition custom is not a concept, but a practice. More often than not it is a process, albeit long drawn, and seldom a fossilized monolith. Traditions and customs tend to be worldly, practical, and more tangible, contrary to concepts which are intellectual and intangible. Traditions and customs act as a bulwark against the unavoidable challenges arising out of nature and the limitations inherent in man. Traditions and customs operate in the real world, and as a result, sometimes they have to make compromises and adjustments with the shifting realities of the world, just to ensure continuity in constant flux. Consequently, traditions and customs bear clear imprints of the world. They belong to this world, not the other world. They pertain to and influence life, not the afterlife, even when they invoke the heavens or the divine. A society, which originates and exists through the day-to-day associations people form via economic and social exchanges such as in business and marriage, is both defined and sustained by its traditions and customs. On the other hand, institutions, as described above, are products of one or more traditions customs that have deepened their imprints on time and on the shared consciousness of a people. Therefore, we can define civilization as a nation's culture wrought in a historical tradition over long years, and ultimately manifested as a network of multiple institutions that help preserve, as well as pass on, the core tenets of the nation's culture. Tradition involves not only the preservation but also and more importantly the careful transmission of a nation's unique practices, beliefs, skills, knowledge, and the nation's distinct outlook, down the successive generations. In short, a nation's culture, thanks to long-standing traditions, crystallizes into a civilization. Borrowing Marx's analogy, one could therefore describe the national culture of a people as the base, and its civilization the superstructure, a large and intricately designed architectural unit, like a palace, made of interlocking traditions and institutions, and standing firm on solid foundations of culture, which includes, among other things, politics. On the Lex Fridman podcast, Prime Minister Modi stated that Indian culture had crystallized into a civilization over thousands of years, adding that this civilization has a unifying thread running through it, primarily consisting of religious institutions such as pilgrimages and socio-linguistic customs such as people's names. This assertion is a clear acknowledgement of historical India's civilizational character and has the additional virtue of being an accurate assessment. However, some journalists, including those from the English language media and many social media users, seized upon this statement, gave it a twist, and claimed that the Prime Minister had described India as a civilizational state on that occasion. Let us now dissect their claim. A civilizational state or civilization state is a polity, i.e., a form of government, a nation organized into a political entity which embraces, or, is founded upon the worldview and the values of a civilization. For example, England used to be a civilization state before it was superseded by the UK. Russia is a civilization state. So is the Vatican City. From Asia, Japan used to be a civilization state before it was defeated by the West in World War II. The Indian Republic of Polity formed in the year 1950 CE after India gained independence from the British Empire. Is not a civilizational state. Civilization state, at least not yet, because the foundational values of the Republic and the operational worldview of its officialdom share a very tenuous relationship with the historical and still surviving Indian civilization. As explained above, a civilization is essentially the culture of a nation crystallized into resilient, time-honored traditions and institutions. Simply put, a civilization represents a more mature stage in a nation's life. In a remarkable feat of institutional resilience and traditional endurance, the historical Indian civilization has retained many of its constituent institutions and traditions to this day, with numerous Indians including the diaspora fervently upholding them. Notably, some of these institutions and traditions are mentioned in texts dating back more than 3 millennia. However, these millennia-old institutions and traditions rarely have the opportunity to shape or revitalize the present-day Indian state, aside from their cursory inclusion in mottos, sarkari symbols, and occasional lofty quotations in official speeches and documents. The currents of thought and behavioral patterns officially acknowledged and endorsed by the modern Indian state often contradict the institutions and traditions that define the living Indian civilization. Therefore, it is incorrect to assume that present-day India is a civilizational state. It will become one only when it fully and uninhibitedly embraces the values and worldview of Indian civilization. Until then, admirers of Indian civilization in general and Indian citizens in particular must sincerely and consistently work to bridge the gap between the living civilization and the mechanical republic. Superficiality, sensationalism, and clickbait journalism will not help in this regard. But if present-day India is not a civilizational state, can it at least be called a civilizational nation? Most certainly, it can. Let us now examine the concept of a civilizational nation. I will begin by challenging the way I have previously defined a civilizational state or civilization state. One might argue that a nation can still be considered a civilizational state even if the state's formal institutions and instruments such as the judiciary, the army, or the constitution do not derive any intellectual, moral, or traditional sustenance from the nation's civilizational character and legacy. In such cases, they may contend, a state or polity governing a nation qualifies as a civilizational state simply because the nation's civilizational character and legacy serve as a unifying force, holding together its diverse elements and ensuring its continuous existence as a single political entity. Following this line of argument, they may assert that India is a civilizational state because Indians are able to sustain a state in the first place due to the thread of civilizational unity that cuts across linguistic and cultural differences within the Indian subcontinent regardless of how disconnected the Indian state may be from the nation's civilizational character and legacy. According to this view, the Indian Republic is already a civilizational state because India's civilizational character legacy stops it from disintegrating or balkanizing, and thus ceasing to exist. My counter to this ingeniously argued projection of present-day India as a civilizational state is as follows. Such an approach to the concept of a civilizational state only adds ambiguity to the classification and understanding of different types of states. If this were a valid way of thinking, we would be compelled to regard Taiwan and present-day China, i.e., the People's Republic of China, or North and South Korea, as entirely separate civilizations merely by virtue of their present-day divided existence. The fact that these countries are now politically fragmented and often hostile to each other does not negate their shared civilizational legacy. There remains significant common civilizational ground between these now divided nations, and some of them actively embrace or at least claim to embrace this shared civilizational heritage. However, in essence, each of these countries functions as a distinct nation-state while simultaneously being part of the same civilization, which currently lacks a unified state. But the absence of a common civilizational state does not prevent these separated nations from acknowledging their shared civilizational identity. The same can be said of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, Germany and Austria, or Norway and Sweden. Each of these pairs of nation-states shares a common civilizational heritage, yet this shared legacy alone has not ensured their political unity as a single state or polity. Nonetheless, they continue to recognize their common civilizational roots. Due to this complexity, I believe that the category civilizational nation is conceptually very useful. It can be defined as a nation that acknowledges its civilizational character and legacy, and yet does not operationalize that vital aspect in constituting and running its polity or state. Neither does it object to being balkanized, and remain in that condition, by appealing to its civilizational heritage. All the countries named above presently behave in this way. And so does the Indian Republic. Therefore, the Indian Republic can definitely be described as a civilizational nation but one that lacks a civilizational state. Merely being a civilization does not guarantee a nation-state's elevation to the level of a civilization state. All civilization states are nation-states, but the converse is not true. In Friedman's show, Prime Minister Modi was wise enough to avoid making a false characterization about the Indian state. It is quite likely that he is aware of the conceptual distinction between a civilization and a civilizational state. After all, he is the one who actually runs the Indian state, and, therefore, is intimately familiar with its true character. The author is an educator, researcher, and social commentator discoursing to rekindle the Indic consciousness in a postmodern, neoliberal world. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely that of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion. Great rethink why Indians must bet on India, not the West. There is a broad consensus that India is on the right path economically. What is noteworthy is the fact that almost every financial institution and rating agency is bullish on India, at a time when the West is squabbling. The world is changing rapidly. Volatility is at an all-time high. American foreign policy has been turned on its head by Donald Trump. Conventional wisdom has been thrown out of the window. Immigration policies are changing across the West, most notably in Canada and the United States. Amidst this flurry, some Indians are being forced to reckon with a new reality, that of the West no longer being the land of opportunities that welcomes foreign immigrants. Recently, a Reddit post triggered a conversation about Canada losing its shine for Indian immigrants, especially students. An anonymous Indian student currently living in Canada posted his experience of living in the North American country. The post, titled "I Regret Moving to Canada," described the education system in Canada as a college scam, saying students pay high fees for low-ranking colleges but teach almost nothing. The user mentioned that the courses are outdated and employers do not take the degrees seriously. According to him, international students are treated as a business opportunity. Once you land here, you realize you've been scammed. Next, the Redditor highlighted the financial struggles faced by international students in Canada, adding the cost of living in Canada is insane. Rent is sky high, groceries are overpriced, and basic necessities cost a fortune. Most students end up working long hours at minimum wage jobs just to survive. Work-life balance doesn't exist. You either work or you don't eat. Perhaps the starkest part of this post was the student's call for Indians to rethink their migration plans. He said, "India is growing, and opportunities are improving. The West sells you an illusion, but once you get here, you realize you've been brainwashed. Don't fall for the trap. Stay in India, invest in yourself, and build something meaningful at home." Several Redditors agreed with the student, with some even saying they had given up their PR permanent residency to be back in India. "It was the most rational decision I've ever made," the user added. Abrupt permit cancellations, increased scrutiny of visa applications, and stricter enforcement of departure regulations have already left thousands of the approximately 423,000 Indians in Canada in a state of uncertainty and distress. Canada must not be looked at in isolation. In fact, Indians are realizing that the West offers opportunities and a comfortable lifestyle mostly to already affluent Indians. These are people who are liquid enough to invest money they earned in India and start life from scratch in a Western country. However, most Indians do not have this luxury. In fact, ordinary young Indians are running off to the West by incurring severe debts. In Punjab and Haryana, children force their parents to sell properties and pay exorbitant fees to travel and visa agents, many of whom turn out to be fraudsters. Last year, Indians chose to dump Sweden, a beautiful European country. Between January and June 2024, Sweden saw a dramatic increase in the number of Indian-born individuals leaving the country, with 2,837 departures, a massive 171% rise from 2023. Why is this happening? For starters, tech companies have been laying off staff. Second, the cost of living has escalated dramatically. Third, Sweden has decided to tighten its visa and work permit rules. Add to that the fact that Sweden does not have enough homes to accommodate immigrants, and you will realize why Indians are on their way out. Meanwhile, in the US, Donald Trump is calling the shots. Immigration has been tightened, deportations are in full swing, and even green card holders are being advised not to leave the country lest they be disallowed re-entry. Anti-Indian racism is thriving on social media, with platforms like X failing to curb hate speech against Indians. Companies that once aggressively recruited Indian talent are now shedding jobs, leaving many skilled professionals in precarious situations. The soaring cost of living in major Western cities, from San Francisco to London, is eroding purchasing power, making it harder to save and build a stable future. Meanwhile, back home, a different story is unfolding. Modi's India has emerged as a rare bright spot in a turbulent global landscape. Our economy is projected to grow at a robust 7% this fiscal year, making us the fastest growing major economy in the world. We boast a burgeoning startup ecosystem, now home to over 100 unicorns, fueled by innovation and a vibrant entrepreneurial spirit. The Indian economy is projected to expand to 4.7 trillion by 2026, which will make it the fourth largest in the world behind the US, China and Germany. In 2028, India will overtake Germany as its economy will expand to 5.7 trillion. Consequently, India's share in the world GDP is projected to rise from 3.5% to 4.5% in 2029. India's venture capital VC sector showed resilience and recovery in 2024, with funding surging to 13.7 billion, 1.4 times higher than in 2023. There is a broad consensus that India is on the right path economically. What is noteworthy is the fact that almost every financial institution and rating agency is bullish on India, at a time when the West is squabbling. Donald Trump's tariff obsession could spell trouble for major world economies, especially in Europe. On the contrary, India appears well placed to not just mitigate the effect of Trump tariffs, but also leverage the personal rapport between Modi and the American president to its benefit. Of course, the decision to stay in India or pursue opportunities abroad is a personal one, and there are valid reasons why some Indians still choose the latter. The allure of specialized research opportunities at world-renowned universities, the desire to maintain close family ties in Western countries, and the pursuit of niche skills not yet readily available in India are all legitimate considerations. However, the landscape is shifting. Choosing to stay in India isn't just about personal gain, it's about contributing to a nation on the rise. It's about applying your skills and knowledge to address the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, from building sustainable infrastructure to developing innovative solutions for our unique societal needs. It's about becoming part of a generation that will shape India's future and leave a lasting legacy, not leave the country at the drop of a hat. Prime Minister Modi has addressed the issue of brain drain multiple times in the past, emphasizing the need to create an environment that attracts and retains talent. This requires a collective effort, from government policies that support innovation and entrepreneurship to private sector initiatives that foster a culture of meritocracy and opportunity. The opportunities are here, it's time to seize them. Let's rethink the traditional narrative and recognize that the Indian dream, the dream of building a prosperous and equitable future for all, is within our reach, right here in India. It's time to bet on India, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. After all, how can a country prosper if its sharpest minds flee? Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: why India Inc. shouldn't lobby for protectionism. Lower tariffs have the potential to galvanize the Indian economy. There is a line, Hey Marjian Jihum to Lutjianja Asibatan Kia Na Karo, in the famous Urdu poem, Aaj Janki Zid Na Karo. Written by the Pakistani poet Fayaz Hashmi, the poem is beautifully sung by Farida Khanum. The line was the sum and substance of what Minister of Commerce Industry Piyush Goyal told Export Promotion Council's EPCs in his recent interaction. Not in these words, of course. His message was prosaic and correct. Reflecting on the reciprocal tariffs, he has cautioned the EPCs to come out of their protectionist mindset and encouraged them to be bold and ready to deal with the world from a position of strength and self-confidence, an official press release said. Last month too, Goyal had exhorted corporate India to shed its protectionist mindset and focus instead on becoming globally competitive. US President Donald Trump has promised to impose sweeping levies on India from April 2. India charges us 100% tariffs. The system is not fair to the US, it never was. On April 2, reciprocal tariffs kick in. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them. If they use non-monetary tariffs to keep us out of their market, then we will use non-monetary barriers to keep them out of our market, Trump said early this month while addressing a joint session of the U.S. Congress. This is even though India and the U.S. have decided to negotiate the first tranche of a bilateral trade agreement (BTA) by fall September-October 2025. The proposed pact is quite comprehensive in scope, aimed at increasing bilateral trade, augmenting market access, decreasing tariff and non-tariff barriers, and boosting supply chain integration. Goyal said that the BTA with the US will be the mother of all deals. Trade talks with Washington are on, and there has been no sign of major disagreements between the two countries. And yet, political and intellectual elites are angry and anxious. Consequently, markets are in ferment. So, the Congress has claimed that the Narendra Modi government's trade policy is disastrous. Congress Media Department Chairman Pawan is aghast at Modi's surrender. Most intellectuals, who are still wedded to the postmodern woke doctrines, are also incensed not just because Trump is challenging and changing their rules but also because India is not resisting the US president's threats and statements. Trump's America is just having its way too easy. This galls the left liberal establishment. 4 points need to be made here. First, just because Trump says something doesn't mean that it is incorrect. Former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian said 2 months ago, India has been protectionist since about 2018. Other experts have also made similar observations. For too long, sections of our industry have enjoyed protection in the form of high import duties and non-tariff barriers (NTBs) like quality control orders (QCOs). Second, if India lowers its duties and reduces NTBs, it may help American firms that want to enter our market, but less protection will also indeed more such of a fillip to our economy. This will, perforce, make our companies become more competitive. They will become more inclined to adopt newer technologies to gain a competitive edge. Besides, this will also mean more choices and lower prices for consumers. Third, less protection will also help micro, small and medium enterprises (MSMEs). While discussing protectionism, we should never lose sight of the interests involved. The economy is not a monolith. Quite apart from various sectors, there is an important categorization based on size. There are a small number of big companies controlled by tycoons, and there are a big number of small companies run by businesspersons you and I come across in everyday life. When someone says that the economy should be protected, we must find out whose interests they are talking about. The steel industry may want higher tariffs, but the user industrious in which MSMEs are preponderant oppose that. In other words, the interests of one sector or lobby should not be confused with the national interest. And, finally, we should not get worked up because we are forced to tweak our economic policy because of external pressure. It is a well-known fact that the tectonic shift in India's economic policy in 1991 was goaded by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The ensuing liberalization was fiercely resisted by both the left and the right. Doomsday scenarios were presented by top intellectuals at that time. We were told that we would become a victim of neo-imperialism, multinational corporations would gobble up Indian companies, and so on. What actually happened? India emerged stronger after the crisis instead of getting swallowed by MNCs. Many Indian companies themselves became MNCs. India is expected to become the third largest economy in the foreseeable future. Tens of crores of people were lifted from abject poverty. Likewise, lower tariffs have the potential to galvanize the Indian economy. So, instead of crying hey Marjian Jihum to Lutjianj, the captains of industry should brace for the future. The author is a freelance journalist. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Right word lest it be forgotten. Operation Searchlight and Pakistan's successes in Bangladesh. As Bangladesh prepares to commemorate its Independence Day on March 26, it becomes imperative to ensure that the historical events that preceded it are not consigned to political oblivion. Bangladesh is undergoing a turbulent phase of its political recalibration following the removal of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in August 2024. Various ideological factions, notably the Islamist Jamaat-Islami, which historically resisted the nation's liberation from Pakistan's hegemonic hold, are increasingly consolidating their influence. These actors are actively shaping the discourses concerning the ideological trajectory and post-liberation identity of Bangladesh. Concurrently, a discernible effort to obscure and diminish the historical memory of the Pakistan Army's atrocities, especially during Operation Searchlight launched on March 25, 1971, have gained momentum. This revisionist impulse is particularly pronounced amidst the new government's overtures toward fostering closer diplomatic and economic ties with Pakistan, signaling a deliberate attempt to erase the memories of genocidal violence of the Pakistan Army. This calls for renewed attention to remind the nation about Pakistan Army's ethno-religious violence against Bengalis as it approaches the 54th anniversary of Operation Searchlight. Before delving into the military operations conducted by the Pakistan Army, it is imperative to contextualize the broader political landscape of Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, and its intricate relationship with West Pakistan, which ultimately culminated in the Liberation War of 1971. The establishment of Pakistan as a bifurcated state comprising two geographically non-contiguous regions, separated by approximately 1,600 kilometers of Indian territory, presented an inherently fragile political configuration. While the nascent state was ideologically unified under the banner of Islamic nationalism, this abstract sense of solidarity rapidly eroded as asymmetrical power dynamics emerged. The initial aspirations of equitable governance and inter-regional parity disintegrated as West Pakistan's polity, predominantly dominated by ethnic Punjabis alongside the influential Muhajir elite from India, asserted disproportionate control over the central apparatus of the state. This was perpetuated by the Pakistani military establishment, whose ranks were overwhelmingly composed of Punjabis. Consequently, the early years of Pakistan's political evolution were marked by systemic marginalization and institutionalized exclusion of the country's diverse ethno-linguistic communities, be it Bengalis, Pashtun, Balokis, and Sindhis. The imposition of Urdu as the sole national language, a policy vigorously pursued by the West Pakistani ruling elite, symbolized this overarching agenda of cultural and political homogenization. This linguistic hegemony was particularly egregious given the demographic realities of Pakistan. Bengali-speaking people, constituting approximately 44 million out of the country's total population of 69 million, formed a clear majority. Despite this demographic predominance, the political leadership in West Pakistan dismissed the cultural and linguistic identity of East Pakistan with disdain. The demand for the recognition of Bangla as one of the state's official languages, alongside Urdu, was met with authoritarian resistance, as evidenced during 1952 language movement protests when dozens of Bangla students were killed by the Pakistan Army in Dhaka University. Though the Pakistani state was compelled to officially recognize Bengali as one of the national languages alongside Urdu in 1954, the West Pakistani-dominated establishment persistently upheld systemic socio-political marginalization and economic subjugation of the Bengali-speaking population of East Pakistan. Amidst the continued homogenization attempts by Pakistani state at the cost of the country's ethnic components, Awami League opposition parties presented a six-point proposal in 1966 which demanded that Pakistan be organized as a federation of units with power devolved to individual units. This was rejected by military dictator Ayub Khan, who had seized power by deposing President Iskandar Mirza in 1958. Nevertheless, the most egregious act of political betrayal was orchestrated in the aftermath of Pakistan's inaugural general elections of December 1970, when the military regime under President General Yahya Khan, in collusion with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto of the Pakistan People's Party, obstructed the democratic mandate of the Bengali-dominated Awami League. Despite Sheikh Mujibur Rahman-led Awami League securing an overwhelming victory with 167 seats out of the total 313 and firmly establishing its right to form the national government, the military junta and Bhutto's faction, driven by entrenched ethno-linguistic prejudices, refused to facilitate the constitutional transfer of power. Bhutto's People's Party, which trailed significantly with only 85 seats, engaged in deliberate political maneuvering to disenfranchise the Awami League. General Yahya Khan brazenly abdicated his constitutional responsibilities, instead conspired with Bhutto to indefinitely delay the convening of the National Assembly, a move emblematic of the regime's determination to negate the electoral will of East Pakistan and perpetuate West Pakistani hegemony. What was more humiliating for the Bangla people was Bhutto's audacious proposition during his meeting with Mujibur Rahman and President Yahya Khan on March 3, 1971, suggesting the establishment of two separate prime ministers for the eastern and western wings of the country. This blatant disregard for the Awami League's unequivocal electoral mandate symbolized the West Pakistani elite's contempt for democratic principles as well as against Bengali people. The provocative demand triggered widespread outrage and mass protests across East Pakistan, reflecting the collective resentment of a population whose democratic aspirations were being systematically undermined. Rather than honoring the legitimate political verdict, the Pakistani state responded with brute militarist repression. It culminated in the launch of Operation Searchlight on the night of March 25, 1971, a brutal military crackdown that started with the arrest of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his associates, thereby marking the commencement of a long campaign of mass violence and systematic persecution. Under the military leadership of commanders such as Lt. General Tika Khan, the Pakistan Army, following the systematic disarmament of Bengali military personnel across key garrisons in East Pakistan, initiated a comprehensive and indiscriminate military campaign against the Bengali population. The offensive commenced with a ruthless assault on Jagannath Hall at Dhaka University, a residential facility predominantly accommodating Hindu students. By the end of the night, the Pakistan Army had unleashed a massacre of staggering proportions, with Robert Payne, an American journalist, estimating that over 7,000 Bengalis were killed, while more than 3,000 were apprehended in Dhaka alone during the initial hours of Operation Searchlight. This underscored the Pakistan Army's intent to suppress dissent through genocidal repression, setting the stage for one of the darkest chapters in the region's history, with hundreds of thousands killed, tortured, and raped. A massacre that came to symbolize the genocidal brutality of Operation Searchlight and the Pakistan Army's campaign of systematic violence against Bengalis was the Chunagar massacre. On May 20, 1971, the Pakistan Army indiscriminately slaughtered over 12,000 civilians, predominantly Hindus fleeing the violence towards crossing into India, at Chunagar in the Dumuria region of Khulna district near the Indian border. The sheer scale and savagery of the massacre cemented General Tika Khan's notorious reputation as the Butcher of Bengal. Although the Pakistan Army officially declared the conclusion of Operation Searchlight on May 20, 1971, coincidentally the same day as the Chunagar massacre, the genocidal onslaught persisted unabated for an additional 7 months. This sustained campaign of systematic violence, characterized by mass atrocities and widespread persecution, culminated only with the formal surrender of the Pakistan Army on December 16, 1971. As Bangladesh prepares to commemorate its Independence Day on March 26, it becomes imperative to ensure that the historical events that preceded it are not consigned to political oblivion. This necessity is particularly pronounced within the context of the country's evolving political landscape, wherein certain factions remain resolutely committed to undermining and trivializing the sacrifices of the liberation war fighters to serve their parochial and self-serving interests. Hence, it is crucial to safeguard the integrity of the nation's collective memory against historical revisionism and ideological manipulation being attempted by these forces. This is essential to ensure that new generations do not forget the great sacrifices and suffering of the people which paved the way for the realization of a future liberated from the colonial-like subjugation imposed by Pakistan. The writer is an author and a columnist. His X-handle is Aaron Anand Live. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's view. Fine point: Russia plays hardball on Ukraine while sweet-talking Trump. The strategy is paying off. The Americans, focused on great power politics, are floating the idea of a US and Russia that work together on the global stage, hoping to reverse Russia's strong pivot towards China. Russia is showering Trump with flattery while driving a hard bargain on Ukraine. Trump himself has further complicated matters by floating the possibility of US ownership of Ukrainian power plants, sending shockwaves through Kyiv. For President Volodymyr Zelensky, the battlefield is no longer the sole challenge. He must now contend with shifting American positions on military aid, diplomatic backing at the United Nations, and even intelligence sharing. Nanan: the recent talks in Riyadh have aimed at securing a limited ceasefire. On Sunday, the US held discussions with Ukraine, followed by a separate meeting with Russia on Monday, all under the same roof. In effect, Washington has positioned itself as a mediator between the two warring sides. However, early indications suggest that expectations for a breakthrough may be misplaced. Putin has already dismissed a joint US-Ukrainian proposal for a full and unconditional 3-0-day ceasefire, instead agreeing only to a pause in aerial strikes against energy infrastructure. How such a partial ceasefire would be implemented remains unclear, especially given that drone and missile attacks continue unabated. Meanwhile, Moscow has made it clear that the negotiations will not be easy, warning of difficult discussions ahead even as Washington optimistically speaks of real progress. The US seeks a broader ceasefire by April 20, but Russia remains focused on securing guarantees for its energy and agricultural exports. A potential revival of the Black Sea grain deal brokered by Turkey in 2022 and abandoned by Moscow last year has emerged as a bargaining chip for Putin. This agreement, which facilitated the safe passage of Ukrainian and Russian agricultural exports, is now a crucial element in Russia's broader bargaining strategy. Following the talks, the Russian delegation was reported to be in a good mood. Yet, it is clear that the primary focus of the talks was simply safety of navigation in the Black Sea, and a deal could be finalized in the coming days. There are no breakthroughs when it comes to a larger ceasefire. Nan the world witnessed as tensions between the US and Ukraine blew up, culminating in a public spat between President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Zelensky. If allies on the same side of the conflict struggle to maintain cohesion, one can only imagine the divide between Washington and Moscow. Talks with Russia remain in their infancy, with Putin holding firm to maximalist demands including the recognition of Russia's annexation of Ukrainian territories in Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia, and a formal guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. Being on the winning side, with Ukraine's position dwindling, the Russian president has no reason not to project strength. While Moscow's position remains unwavering, Trump has watered down Ukraine's position with his non-committal treatment. Donald Trump has held 2 long phone conversations with Vladimir Putin, and even suggested that the 2 leaders could visit each other's nations soon. The Americans, focused on great power politics, are floating the idea of a US and Russia that work together on the global stage, hoping to reverse Russia's strong pivot towards China. Russia is showering Trump with flattery while driving a hard bargain on Business Sand. The strategy is working. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, who met Putin earlier in March, believes that Putin wants peace, that he does not plan to take all of Europe, and that he is not a bad guy but he's super smart. He said all this in a podcast with Tucker Carlson. Witkoff also went on to reveal that Putin gave him a portrait of President Trump from a leading Russian artist and that Putin went to church to pray for Trump when there was an attempt on his life last year. All this left Trump touched, according to Witkoff. These gestures suggest that Trump is pursuing a high-stakes diplomatic gamble, one that relieves pressure on Putin while exerting new demands on Ukraine. The US president has turned the screws on Kyiv, conditioning further American support on Ukraine, ceding critical mineral resources and energy infrastructure to US ownership. However, whether this strategy will yield tangible results remains to be seen. If Trump's overtures to Putin fail, he risks both personal embarrassment and a diplomatic impasse. If he refrains from pressuring Russia, Washington may find itself unable to secure a meaningful settlement for Ukraine, undermining American credibility. And for Ukraine, the situation is fraught with peril. The battlefield remains active, yet American support, once a cornerstone of Ukraine's resilience, has become increasingly unpredictable. In February, Washington voted against Ukraine in a UN resolution, aligning itself with the likes of North Korea, Belarus, and Russia in refusing to condemn Moscow. Even India, which has consistently abstained from such votes, did not go so far. More consequentially, Trump has halted US military aid, a decision that dramatically weakens Ukraine's position on the battlefield. With the US having supplied over half of Ukraine's total foreign aid including weapons, financial assistance, and humanitarian relief, Kyiv now faces a critical shortfall. Furthermore, Washington has paused intelligence sharing with Ukraine, further exacerbating its vulnerabilities. These sudden American policy shifts have left both Ukraine and Europe scrambling to recalibrate their strategies, with transatlantic unity fractured. Moscow, sensing an opportunity, is leveraging this uncertainty, hoping that Western fatigue will ultimately force Kyiv into painful concessions. Nan the war in Ukraine has entered a new and volatile phase where diplomacy is proving to be as contested as the battlefield. Russia continues to dictate the terms of negotiations, demonstrating both a willingness to fight and a capacity to sustain prolonged conflict. Ukraine, for its part, cannot afford to concede ground, yet finds itself increasingly constrained by dwindling manpower as well as firepower. The stakes for Ukraine could not be higher. If Western support continues to erode, Kyiv may be forced into a settlement heavily skewed in Russia's favor. Should the conflict persist without resolution, Ukraine's economic and military endurance will remain under severe strain. For now, one thing is certain: more negotiations have not brought more solutions, only more uncertainty. The illusion of diplomacy persists, but the war remains as intractable as ever. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: is there a case for developing Indian parameters to measure world happiness? India must develop suitable new parameters centered on Indian concepts of happiness to produce a balanced report of happiness of the world. India is ranked low on the World Happiness Index again this year. There are no surprises with happiness rankings, with the World Happiness Report released early this month as the Nordic nations still ranked on the top again as always, with Finland at the top in the first place. Followed by Denmark, Iceland, Sweden in the next 3 ranks, and the European nation Netherlands appears in the 5th place. The surprise here is Israel in the 8th place. A drop from 5th place last year, which is not bad at all considering the fact that it is still undergoing war and faced severe social crisis due to the October 7, 2024, violent killings and abductions of Israelis from Nova Music Festival. Other countries in the next 5 places to 10 are taken by European nations. Dominance of the Nordic and European nations among the rankings is clear. The rankings have remained constant in the last decade with few changes. However, it is strange that India continues to rank below nations undergoing strife and civil war, along with widespread economic disparities like Pakistan rank 108 and Palestine rank 99. India is ranked at 118, followed by very few countries. India has been in the bottom 30 nations in the happiness rankings for a number of years. The US also dropped one rank to 24th in 2025. India has accomplished remarkable growth this decade, recording 105% growth while doubling its economy. This growth has resulted in India eliminating extreme poverty and alleviating stark economic disparity. India showed decline in urban and rural inequality. The urban Gini declined from 36.7 to 31.9 and the rural Gini declined from 28.7 to 27.0, which is unprecedented in the context of high per capita growth. Gini index or Gini coefficient is a statistical measure of income inequality. However, this doesn't seem to have made any dent in the world happiness rank as far as India is concerned. Therefore, this begs the question if there is an issue with the parameters of measuring happiness applied to each nation, as the metrics used to arrive at the happiness ranking seem to be adversely affecting India, missing India's progress in numerous metrics. According to the report, the world's happiest country is based on a comprehensive analysis of Gallup polling data from 143 countries for the past 3 years, specifically monitoring performance in 6 particular categories: 1. Gross domestic product per capita, 2. Social support, 3. Healthy life expectancy, 4. Freedom to make your own life choices, 5. Generosity of the general population, and 6. Perceptions of internal and external corruption levels. However, nations with larger populations and cultural differences will never be able to rank high in the World Happiness Index due to the parameters not being appropriately weighted for cultural and population differences. Sparsely populated nations naturally acquire high rank due to the central importance placed on GDP per capita. Larger nations like India and China might have booming economies worth trillions of dollars, but in terms of GDP per capita they will always be lower than sparsely populated nations. Culturally, India's concept of happiness differs from Western nations. For example, the Indian parameters of happiness are not individual-centric but family-centric. India must develop its own parameters of happiness suitable for its culture and society. Point 1. Mindfulness and looking inward not outward is considered the most important aspect of life. Materialism as measured by individual wealth and professional accomplishment is not considered the ultimate achievement of life. Recluses who have left material life to seek spiritual growth are accepted as the most happy people of the world. This places India in complete opposition to the GDP per capita measure, which is used as the foremost measure of happiness in the West, which is a measure of outward materialism. Point 2. India is a family-centered society. Most elders stay home and die at home rather than being sent to senior care facilities. Family is the center of life. A successful grihasti family man or woman takes care of gurus, teachers, mentors, ancestors and family, and guests, anyone else that may need help. So Indian concept of social support is different, not dependent on whims and services of the government. Point 3. Health and life expectancy is immaterial for India. Life is just one in a series of many previous future lives one soul may undergo in samsara cycle of life. Spiritual teachers of India like Shankara and Vivekananda lived only a few decades but were considered great beings for their accomplished life. Living life without contributing to society in a routine manner is not considered a well-lived life. So, the Western concept of managing to live long is conceptually flawed to understand happiness in India. Happiness comes from fulfillment according to Indian understanding, which should come from enlightened life, not from wealth. Point 4. Freedom to make life choices. India, due to its multiplicity and diverse lifestyles, offers more freedom to make life choices than the West gives credit, since life in India is different. The recent Kumbh Mela brought people of all walks of life to the forefront as they came to participate in Kumbh Mela. It is impossible to think that as much variety of lifestyles exist without freedom of choice. However, to the Western society, millions of young men and women living as recluses might appear as a disaster rather than an achievement. Point 5. Generosity. Who is to say generosity of people in India is less than the West Indians donate millions of rupees to feed millions of people at temples and ashrams? The generosity of common people to help others is visible in the recently concluded Kumbh Mela, where millions are fed and taken care of for the duration of the Mela through the service of many. However, the donations to temples or other causes remains anonymous, which does not record the names of donors. Therefore, this might not appear in statistical data and might show India as less generous than it is. Point 6. Perceptions of corruption. Corruption is widespread across the world. The corruption in the West is not as obvious as it is in the higher levels of society and hidden under the system, so might not be as perceptible to the common people, unlike India where corruption is pervasive among the lower ranks of bureaucracy and easily perceived by the common people. So different parameters should be developed to address this discrepancy in assessing the extent of corruption in each society. The problem with the World Happiness Report and rankings developed in the Nordic nations is that it is tinted with the notions of Nordic concepts of happiness, which are an extension of concepts of Western life. Therefore, no matter how these parameters of happiness index are applied, it will always place Nordic nations ranking at the top with other Western nations following closely behind. Therefore, unless a change is introduced into the parameters of measuring happiness, India will forever be ranked at the bottom quartile for the fault of being outside of the Eurozone concepts of understanding of happiness. India must develop suitable new parameters centered on Indian concepts of happiness to produce a balanced report of happiness of the world. These new parameters of measuring happiness of the world might not only help India, but also help other Asian and African nations, which have been assigned abysmal ranks since the beginning of the World Happiness Rankings. The author is Professor of History and Religious Studies, Department of Social Sciences, Shawnee State University, the U.S. The views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: the evolving socio-political thinking of Hindu Americans. The socio-political changes in the Indian community slowly saw the fake, make-believe politicians losing steam because they tried to be what they were not. Indians are slowly and surely becoming international citizens. I was in the USA for a month recently, during which I interacted with a cross-section of Americans, including black people, intellectuals, and Hindu Americans. I even had long chats with Hindu youth in a few cities. My stay everywhere was with my friends from India, i.e. local Hindu families. I could not help but reflect on my earlier interactions with email groups during the Donald Trump-Hillary Clinton elections, and personal conversations with many Indian Americans, including Muslims, during my earlier trip in December 2019. I experienced a huge upheaval in Hindu society about how they look at American politics as U.S. citizens. During the Clinton-Trump battle, I saw a big divide between the traditional Democrat supporters among the Hindu community and the New Age Republicans. Democrats, being the vocal majority at that time, were more aggressive. The Democratic Party was the party for all immigrants by default, and Indians were no different. However, the younger citizens and the American-born citizens were no more bound by the reflexive sympathy for Democrats. The political divide was so bitter that once I commented on a group, why were they fighting with each other? Why could they not come up with a Hindu agenda and talk to their respective candidates that this is our agenda, whichever candidate wins. Hindus do not seek any favor because they have risen with hard work without seeking any favors. The only thing that worries and irritates Hindus is the way their religion is presented in education and the way they are misrepresented in public discourse. I was surprised at that time to hear from some senior Hindus that we do not have that kind of lobbying power. However, since I did not have any stakes in American politics, I just let it pass. I had also told my hardcore Democrat friends that unless Clinton came up with a clear stand on Islamic terrorism and radicalism, she would lose. And she lost. In the next election, we had the spectacle of Hindus falling for Kamala Harris, as one of their own, despite her never accepting this ownership, except for a few public shows of Indianness. It was the time when some politicians with Indian ancestry used to show themselves as American Christians, converted for the sake of being successful in politics. People like Bobby Jindal and Nikki Haley tried to shy away from their ex-Hindu and Indian identity, while we Indians insisted that they had strong Indian roots. The socio-political changes in the Indian community slowly saw the fake, make-believe politicians losing steam because they tried to be what they were not. I could sense the changing mood of Hindu American citizens, the growing confidence in their American identity, while being open about their affection for their land of origin. They had begun taking an interest in American politics more actively. One saw more Indians in local politics, if not national politics. Some senators and congressmen women did come up. But they were either highly anti-Hindu or took one stance in public and another in private. So, there was an element of tentative uncertainty about them and their beliefs. In this election, we saw Hindu politicians comfortable in their skin. No more apologetic, nor did they need to Americanize with a name change, no more need to show themselves to be more American Christian than they were. Their 2 generations of success based on sheer hard work backed by strong family values in that land have made them more confident and bolder. They profess a strong belief in America without giving up on their identity. Similarly, I also found Hindu youth and younger generation Indians pitching their political and social views very confidently. In one of the meetings, I met 2 young Hindu Americans making a strong pitch for the Democratic Party, believing that the youth were being misled by the Republican Party, which can never be theirs. There were also strong Trump supporters there. But, like true Hindus, they did not have any confrontation. I felt very happy to see this transformation of the political landscape within the Hindu community. No more bitter fights within the community, but healthy competition. Another interesting thing I noted was that the Indians in the USA with H-1B visas seem to be much less worried about their visa renewal than the Indians in India. They are confident of their skills and knowledge. The pro-Trump Indians and even Democrat Indians feel that what Trump is doing is necessary for the USA to break free of the shackles put in by the extreme left. A senior Hindu Democrat leader said they were saved from doing this cleanup as Trump is doing it, and they will also reap the benefit from this spring cleaning. There is nothing one can do about hardcore Democrat supporters who were swearing at Trump. But there were objective critics who feared that the aggressive stance of tariffs could hurt the USA badly, as inputs will become costly. In a way, there is a big churn. And like other Americans, Hindu Americans are also equally invested in it. An Atlanta senator, who was incidentally black, asked me about Modi's economic policies, which he thought were leftist, although he was being called a right-wing politician. I responded by telling him how India does not fit into the Western binary of left and right. And how, economically, Modi and Hindu economic philosophy was more left of center. I also explained the philosophy of integral humanism that Modi imbibed. It was refreshing to see rising American interest in India without any traditional baggage. With a fresh look. A group of students at Harvard requested me to give a talk about my book Conflict Resolution the RSS Way. Although they got some hate mail from the usual suspects, they stuck to their guns. I am told it was the first talk ever in the Kennedy Center at Harvard with a subject directly about the RSS. Surprisingly, it was attended by students from 5 countries from the African continent and Eastern Europe. Apart from the Indian students. I met an eminent professor who specializes in democratic institutions. He shared a chapter about the success of India and Indonesia in democracy. When I told him that Indian democratic polity does not flow from the Western model and just our constitution, but from our long tradition of institutions like Panchayat, to my surprise, he had no clue. He was honestly eager to know more. However, his ignorance showed me how the academics' references in the West is dominated totally by left, secular intellectuals. So much so that he could not find any book about these traditions. Though I did send him a list of a few books, I hope the Ministry of Foreign Affairs tries to bridge this gap of lack of books in Western institutions. During my earlier visits and even the current one, when Hindu Americans would ask me about problems in Bharat, I used to teasingly tell them, let us worry about Bharat and Modi. You should just enjoy the spectacle of rising Bharat but worry about how Hindus are portrayed in your own country. One of the elder Americans was unhappy at this suggestion. He poured forth his love for his country of origin and how he carried his Hindu identity back from his village in Bharat to America, where he had come due to some circumstances, but always thought of Bharat. In the same meeting, when I asked a young, American-born Hindu girl about her views, she went beyond what I had imagined. She said, I am not worried about political developments in Bharat. I think we should focus on where Hindus will be 100 years from now in America, where the community would be in American society. When I look back at the last 1012 years of Indian and American politics and the evolving thought process of Hindu Americans, especially the new generation, I like the feel of the rising expectations and changing perceptions of Hindus and local Americans about Bharat and their own country, that is, the USA. Indians are slowly and surely becoming international citizens. The writer is a well-known author and political commentator. He has written several books on RSS like RSS 360, Sant Swaraj, RSS Evolution from an Organization to a Movement, Conflict Resolution the RSS Way, and done a PhD on RSS. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS 18's views. Nan. Straight Talk. Punjab's economy at a crossroads. Protests cleared, real issues remain. Punjab's economic woes demand immediate action, not just political maneuvering. The state must pivot towards a long-term, sustainable recovery plan. Punjab has suffered at the hands of economic disruptors for 5 years now. What started in 2020 as a statewide protest against the 3 farm bills brought by the Narendra Modi government metamorphosed into a larger movement, with farmers primarily from Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh camping on the borders of Delhi for more than a year. The centre then decided to withdraw the contentious agriculture bills, which helped disperse the protesters. While normalcy returned to Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, Punjab somehow found itself caught between a rock and a hard place. Farmer unions, ostensibly worried about losing relevance, continued demonstrations against the Modi government at the state level. For about a year now, some farmer unions have blocked the border between Punjab and Haryana, causing tremendous pain to the state's economy. After its Delhi loss, AAP is in survival mode. A Punjab defeat in 2027 could relegate it to political obscurity. So when Punjab police came cracking down on protesters at the Shamhu and Kanori borders on March 19, many were quick to connect the dots. Ahead of a crucial assembly by poll in Ludhiana West, AAP sought to address the fears of Punjab's industrialists and traders, who have suffered extensive losses owing to continuing protests. The prolonged shutdown of key border crossings Shamhu, Kanori, and Kundliha led to an estimated economic setback exceeding Rs 1.25 lakh crore for Punjab and Haryana. The regions adjacent to these borders faced immediate financial damages surpassing Rs 1,600 crore, while Punjab's businesses alone bore losses north of Rs 1 lakh crore. Therefore, the Aam Aadmi Party stood a fair chance of losing the battle for Ludhiana West even before the first vote was cast. It is for this reason that the Punjab police was brought in to dismantle the protest sites and detain farmer leaders and hundreds of protesters. From vociferously supporting such protesters when they were camping on the borders of Delhi to now, quite literally bulldozing their protest sites, life has come full circle for Arvind Kejriwal's party. Another reason why Bhagwant Man's government felt comfortable bulldozing the Kisan Dharna is the fact that farmer unions have gradually lost support in Punjab. The initial adrenaline rush of 2021 is over, and Punjabis want their state to get back on track and focus on issues that really matter. After all, the issues facing Punjab are severe and many. Let's start with the economy. Punjab ranks as India's second most indebted state, with its total liabilities estimated at Rs 3,78,453 crore. With a debt-to-GSDP ratio of 46.6, Punjab holds the second highest debt burden in the country, effectively owing nearly half of its annual economic output. The state is now relying on borrowing merely to cover routine expenses, trapping it in a risky cycle of debt repayment and fresh loans. Unwise subsidies for farmers, especially the provision of free electricity, have landed Punjab in its present financial mess. In addition, industrial growth has been stagnant, with many manufacturers even moving out of the state for greener pastures. Punjab also faces a crippling water table crisis. The land of the five rivers, once known for its water abundance, is now on the path to desertification. In many ways, this is a tragedy of epic proportions. As per data presented by the Union Minister of State for Jal Shakti, Rajbhushan Chowdhury, in the Rajya Sabha on February 3, groundwater levels in Punjab have been steadily declining. Out of 174 wells monitored over the past 5 years, 67.2 117 wells recorded a drop in water levels. Punjab ranks among the worst affected states in the country, experiencing one of the most significant groundwater depletions. Punjab's drug problem needs no introduction. Bollywood has made films about it, Punjabis have been made fun of, and India's enemies have taken advantage of the menace. The Aam Aadmi Party, which vowed to eliminate drugs from Punjab, has evidently failed to keep its promise. Only recently has the party shifted gears and launched an extensive crackdown on the state's drug cartels. This, too, has more to do with the setback AAP faced in Delhi than a genuine desire to alleviate the state's drug woes. Add to the mix the fact that Punjabis are leaving their state to settle abroad, and you now also have a demographic problem to deal with. As more and more Sikhs fly out, Christian missionaries have been having the time of their lives in Punjab. The lure of money and supposed miraculous healings is driving many low-income residents of the state towards Christianity. According to reports, more than 350,000 people have converted to Christianity in the past 2 years alone. If you happen to travel through Punjab now, the demographic change is hard to miss. Punjab's economic woes demand immediate action, not just political maneuvering. The state must pivot towards a long-term, sustainable recovery plan through industrial revitalization. Punjab must create an investor-friendly climate by cutting bureaucratic red tape, upgrading infrastructure, and offering tax incentives to manufacturers and logistics firms. Reviving Ludhiana, Amritsar, and Jalandhar as industrial hubs will be key to attracting businesses back. Agricultural reform. Punjab's over-reliance on wheat and paddy is unsustainable. Farmers need incentives to shift towards less water-intensive, high-value crops like maize, pulses, and horticulture. The government must also invest in precision farming, irrigation efficiency, and post-harvest infrastructure. Debt restructuring. Fiscal discipline. Punjab cannot afford reckless borrowing. The state must streamline subsidies, improve tax collection, and focus on revenue-generating sectors like food processing, renewable energy, and tourism. Water conservation. With Punjab's groundwater levels depleting at alarming rates, urgent conservation measures are essential. Large-scale adoption of micro-irrigation, rainwater harvesting, and crop pattern shifts must be fast-tracked. Tackling social decline. Punjab's rising drug abuse problem demands a multi-pronged crackdown, stronger law enforcement, stricter border control, and expanded rehabilitation programs. Additionally, unchecked demographic shifts require the government to invest in skill development and local job creation to stem mass emigration. The bulldozers may have cleared Punjab's roads, but the real cleanup is yet to begin. While the immediate economic relief is welcome, it is only a temporary fix. The AAP government now faces a defining test. Will it seize this opportunity to address Punjab's deep-rooted crises, or will it continue firefighting one crisis at a time? Bulldozing protests might win elections, but it won't secure Punjab's future. Only a bold, reform-oriented agenda can do that. Nan. Bastar's transformation. Chhattisgarh on brink of real revival, courtesy Modi government. Sustainable peace and genuine revival in Bastar will require not just military might and financial investment, but also a deep commitment to human rights, inclusive development, and sustained engagement with the communities who call this troubled region home. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently met Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Vishnu Deosai. The encounter, on the surface, might appear to be routine political choreography ahead of the PM's Chhattisgarh visit on March 30, but beneath the veneer of political meetings lies a more profound reality: a concerted, sustained effort by both the Indian government and the Chhattisgarh state administration to wrestle the region from the suffocating grip of extremist left-wing Maoism. This insurgency has bled Bastar for decades, leaving scars of violence and underdevelopment etched deep into the land and its people. Recent reports emanating from the region, detailing successful anti-Naxal operations, tentatively point towards a shift in momentum, a potential upswing in the long, arduous battle. But the crucial question remains: are we witnessing a true convergence of security gains and developmental initiatives, a point where tangible progress can finally take root and flourish in this historically volatile landscape? Is Bastar, against all odds, finally on the cusp of a genuine revival? And for too long, Bastar has been synonymous with violence, a theater of relentless conflict where the writ of the state often struggled to penetrate. The pervasive shadow of Maoist insurgency has not only claimed countless lives but has also fundamentally stunted any prospect of development. To even contemplate a revival, a necessary, albeit grim, precondition is the establishment of a semblance of security. The recent surge in anti-Naxal operations indicates a decisive push in this direction. News reports are replete with figures: 30 Maoists killed in separate encounters, 81 Naxal deaths already this year, and 305 extremists killed in just 15 months. These numbers, stark and unsettling as they are, paint a picture of intensified engagement, a relentless pursuit of Maoist cadres by security forces. These aren't isolated incidents but rather the result of a strategic recalibration. The political will of the central as well as the state government is on the same page. This unified front has empowered security forces to adopt a more aggressive posture, establishing forward operating bases deep within Maoist strongholds like the Abu Hamad region, an area once considered impenetrable. These camps, far from mere outposts, act as launch pads for deeper incursions, disrupting the Maoist movement and eroding their operational space. Sundaraj P., Inspector General of Police for Bastar Range, further emphasizes the enhanced coordination between the different anti-Maoist forces as a key factor in recent successes. The multi-force operations, involving specialized units like DRG, STF, and Central Armed Police Forces, signify a concerted and sophisticated approach, a departure from previous, perhaps more fragmented, strategies. While the human cost of such intense operations must never be discounted, these security gains appear to be carving out vital space, a necessary clearing of the ground before any meaningful development can take hold. Nanan security operations, while crucial in the short term, are not an end. To believe that military victories alone will solve the deeply entrenched Naxal problem is foolish. Focusing solely on body counts and arrests risks overlooking the deeper societal issues that fuel this insurgency. True and lasting peace in Bastar hinges not just on neutralizing Maoist fighters, but on fundamentally transforming the socio-economic landscape that breeds discontent and provides fertile ground for extremist ideologies to flourish. This is where the Modi government's commitment to development becomes critically important and potentially transformative. The initiatives being rolled out in Bastar present this crucial link between development and long-term stability. The electrification of Tmener village after 77 years of independence is an improvement in the lives of its residents. Electricity brings not just light but opportunities, for education, for small businesses, for a life less burdened by the constant struggle for basic necessities. Similarly, the Chhattisgarh budget earmarking a substantial Rs 1.65 lakh crore with a special focus on development of Naxal-affected Bastar signals a serious financial commitment. This budget isn't just about security, it prioritizes tourism, security, and infrastructure, recognizing the multifaceted nature of development. The Aspirational Districts Program, the Special Central Assistance, and ambitious road construction projects like the Road Requirement Plan and Road Connectivity Project are examples of targeted interventions aimed at addressing the systemic underdevelopment that has plagued Bastar for generations. Nanan political promises are easily made, especially in regions like Bastar, often relegated to the periphery of national consciousness. However, the Modi government's approach, particularly in recent times, appears to be more than mere rhetoric. The substantial budgetary allocation, the focus on Bastar in policy pronouncements, and the consistent emphasis on both security and development suggest a level of sustained political will that may be different from past efforts. The budget aims to establish Bastar as a new development model, prioritizing the transformation of Naxal-affected areas. This ambition to not just contain the insurgency but to fundamentally reshape Bastar's trajectory is noteworthy. Furthermore, the creation of specialized units like the Bastar Fighters, and the emphasis on improving infrastructure, police stations, roads, telecom connectivity all point towards a long-term strategic vision. The Chhattisgarh Hanjir Vision 2047 initiative, outlining 10 major missions focused on healthcare, tourism, agriculture, education, IT, and infrastructure, further underscores a comprehensive, future-oriented approach. While skepticism is warranted given the history of unfulfilled promises in conflict zones, the sheer scale and scope of the current initiatives, coupled with the sustained political backing from both the state and central governments, offer a glimmer of hope that this commitment might translate into tangible, lasting change on the ground. Nanan, despite the promising signs, the path to Bastar's revival is fraught with challenges. ANEWS 18 opinion piece rightly cautions against ignoring the human cost of counterinsurgency. A purely security-centric approach risks alienating the communities the government seeks to protect. Alienating the very people we aim to protect will only breed further resentment and potentially push them back into the arms of the insurgents, the article warns. Concerns about human rights violations, the potential for collateral damage, and the need for accountability are paramount. The fear and mistrust that pervade local communities, hindering intelligence gathering and community policing, are significant obstacles to overcome. Moreover, development, while crucial, is a complex and long-term undertaking. Resource allocation remains a persistent challenge. Simply increasing spending is not enough, it must be strategic and focused on sustainable development initiatives that empower these communities. The need for dialogue, rehabilitation, and addressing the root causes of Naxalism, poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity cannot be overstated. Maharashtra's Project Salam is a promising model for reintegrating former Naxalites and highlights the importance of a humane and inclusive approach. According to the South Asia Terrorism Portal, a substantial number of Naxalites, estimated at 16,780, have surrendered between 2000 and 2024, suggesting a willingness to renounce violence. Sustainable peace and genuine revival in Bastar will require not just military might and financial investment, but also a deep commitment to human rights, inclusive development, and sustained engagement with the communities who call this troubled region home. Bastar stands at a critical juncture. The Modi government's unwavering support, coupled with tangible security gains and a renewed focus on development, provides a window of opportunity, a potential turning point in the region's tumultuous history. However, the challenges are immense, and the ghosts of past failures loom. Whether this moment truly heralds a real revival or another fleeting dawn in a long night of conflict remains to be seen. The path forward demands sustained commitment, nuanced strategies, and, above all, a genuine understanding that the true battle for Bastar is not just against insurgents, but for the hearts and minds of its people. Only then can the promise of transformation become a lasting reality, allowing Bastar to finally emerge from the shadows of violence and claim its rightful place in a resurgent India. Nan. Opinion. Yadavpur University, a legacy tarnished by political influence. The Yadavpur University's decline is a tragic commentary on the intersection of politics and education in Bengal. The varsity's future lies in the hands of its students, faculty, and policymakers. The Yadavpur University JU once stood as a beacon of academic excellence and intellectual pride in Kolkata, a city known for its rich history of education and culture. Established in 1955, the JU soon emerged as one of India's leading institutions, drawing students and scholars plagued by political influence, student violence, and a general decay in the quality of education. The question many ask today is, how did this transformation happen, and what is its significance for Bengal's education system at large? To understand the root cause of the JU's decline, one must look back at the political landscape in Bengal. The Left Front, led by the Communist Party of India Marxist or CPIM, ruled the state for over 3 decades, from 1977 to 2011. During this period, the left's dominance over educational institutions, including the JU, was profound. Universities, colleges, and schools were not only seen as spaces for intellectual development but also as ideological battlegrounds, where the left entrenched its political influence. Campus elections, student unions, and the curriculum itself became platforms for the left to assert its power. The Yadavpur University, with its vibrant intellectual environment, became a microcosm of this larger political culture. The university's student body was deeply infused with leftist ideologies, and its faculty often followed the same political leanings. While political engagement and activism in educational institutions are not inherently negative, the left's grip on the JU shifted the focus from academic excellence to political maneuvering. Over the years, the JU became more associated with protests, strikes, and ideological conformity than with fostering an environment for free thought and scholarly pursuits. With the rise of the Trinamool Congress (TMC) in 2011 and the subsequent end of the Left Front's reign in Bengal, one might have expected a shift towards a more neutral, development-focused approach to education. However, the situation has not significantly improved. Mamata Banerjee's government, which came to power with promises of change, has often failed to dismantle the deeply entrenched political culture that had taken root under the left's long rule. Her government's approach to education has been marred by a lack of direction, corruption, and interference in academic affairs, further eroding the quality of education and administrative autonomy at JU and other universities. This shift in leadership, combined with a lack of genuine reform, has left the JU caught between two political forces. The left's remnants remain entrenched in the university's administrative and student bodies, while the TMC, in power at the state level, has done little to break this cycle of politicization. What was once an institution known for its intellectual diversity has become a battleground where political ideologies, rather than academic pursuit, dominate discussions. The Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP), which is hoping for glory in the forthcoming assembly elections of 2026 as the opposition party in Bengal, might view the JU's decline as an opportunity to capitalize on the disillusionment that many students and faculty members feel with the current state of affairs. The BJP has long accused Banerjee's government of stifling free speech and allowing political violence to flourish in institutions of higher learning. In such a situation, the JU could provide a valuable platform for the BJP to present itself as a defender of academic freedom and a proponent of nonpartisan educational reform. The BJP might find resonance among students who are frustrated with the prevailing leftist politics that dominates the campus. By promoting a vision of an apolitical, merit-based education system, the BJP could attract those who feel suffocated by the ideological monopoly in the JU. However, the party's approach needs to be nuanced. Merely opposing the leftist status quo is not enough. To win the hearts of JU students, the BJP must present a clear agenda for improving academic standards, ensuring the autonomy of universities, and fostering a more inclusive and diverse campus culture. One of the most disturbing developments at the Yadavpur University has been the violent attacks on media personnel, who attempted to cover the protests and incidents on campus. This verbal and physical aggression towards journalists and media crew members is emblematic of a larger breakdown of democratic principles at the university and reveals the deepening intolerance for dissent and critical scrutiny, even in the very spaces that should be fostering open debate. It's important to note that the media, especially independent outlets, play a vital role in holding both government and opposition forces accountable. When students at the JU, influenced by years of political indoctrination, resort to violence against the press, it signals a deeper rot in the educational system. What is at stake here is not just the reputation of a university, but the very idea of free thought and democratic dialogue that universities should ideally protect and promote. While much of the youth's decline can be traced back to the left's influence, Banerjee's government has not been immune to criticism for its handling of the state's education system. Under her administration, the focus has shifted away from fostering academic excellence to securing political loyalty. Many universities, including the JU, have seen the rise of violent student politics, with parties using educational spaces to further their agendas rather than promoting scholarly engagement. Banerjee's failure to tackle these issues has compounded the decline. Her inability to depoliticize institutions and create a genuinely conducive environment for learning has further alienated students who are caught between political factions. If she is to reclaim any credibility in the education sector, she must ensure that universities like the JU are freed from the grip of political parties, providing students with the autonomy to think critically and independently. The Yadavpur University's decline is a tragic commentary on the intersection of politics and education in Bengal. Today, to see anti-national slogans and graffiti on its walls is no surprise. Once a symbol of academic rigor, it is now a case study in how political interference can erode the very foundations of higher education. The BJP may see this as an opportunity to champion educational reforms, but to succeed, it must look beyond short-term political gains and focus on long-term structural changes. Ensuring academic autonomy, improving infrastructure, and creating an environment of intellectual freedom are essential if the JU is to reclaim its former glory. Ultimately, the Yadavpur University's future lies in the hands of its students, faculty, and policymakers. Only by breaking free from the political chains that bind it can the university hope to return to its former position as one of India's premier educational institutions. To expect this in West Bengal might be too much to ask for just now, and the fall of the JU will remain a sobering reminder of the perils of politicizing education. The author is a BJP spokesperson, writer, social worker, and a corporate learning and development expert. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion Mahakam a research opportunity unlike any other. There is no doubt that researching the Mahakam is both rich and novel in terms of inquiry and outcomes, especially when compared to other pilgrimages worldwide. The 4-5 Day Mahakam Mela in India has now concluded. However, this spiritual gathering remains significant in a unique way. Beyond its religious and cultural aspects, it has also provided rich material for academic inquiry, research, and new perspectives. The intersection of academia and research has taken multiple shifts, fostering innovation and novelty. Suffice it to say, the event has opened up diverse research platforms with fresh perspectives. Scholars and researchers have delved deeply into both theory and practice to study this vast spiritual and cultural festival. Research methodologies including ethnography, interviews, focus groups, and experimental approaches have been applied and reassessed for their validity. Studies on the wide range of rituals and ceremonies have contributed to the development of new research methodologies. Findings and generalizations are forthcoming, with emerging socio-cultural, economic, and management theories set to challenge existing paradigms. Mixed methods, research design, sampling techniques, and interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches have become central points of discussion. Originally organized in 1870 under British rule, this vibrant cultural festival now rests on strong pedagogical foundations, incorporating integrative, collaborative, reflective, and inquiry-based approaches to comprehend phenomena that often defy description and challenge the imagination. The Mahakam, held after 144 years, was not just a spiritual spectacle but also an unparalleled research hub. Scholars from diverse fields, anthropology, sociology, environmental science, public health, and artificial intelligence examined the grand event to understand human behavior, urban planning, and the impact of faith-driven mobility. Unlike many global pilgrimages such as Dajia Abraham's Path, Lourdes, Kumano Kodo, and St. Magnus Waith, Mahakam stood out due to its sheer scale, demographic diversity, and temporary city planning, making it an extraordinary case study. There is no doubt that researching the Mahakam is both rich and novel in terms of inquiry and outcomes, especially when compared to other pilgrimages worldwide. The Dajia pilgrimage in Taiwan remains one of the most well-known spiritual events globally, fulfilling tourists' spiritual aspirations while also driving the development of destination tourism. Studies on this event have provided theoretical insights into happiness, marketing, and sustainable development. Abraham's Path, a cultural walking route tracing the journey of Abraham across the Middle East, serves as a model for cultural tourism, inspiring hope for humanity. A Harvard Business School case study has explored ways to revitalize the Abraham Path as a cultural tourism route. Adams Peak in Sri Lanka stands out as a unique pilgrimage site sacred to Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, reflecting diverse religious interpretations. Research on this site has utilized ethnographic fieldwork, observational studies, archival research, and geographic information systems. Santiago de Compostela in Spain attracts tourists seeking spiritual fulfillment, nature experiences, and sports-related activities. Similarly, the Via Francigena, oldest and most significant medieval pilgrimage route connecting northwestern Europe with the Italian peninsula, remains pivotal for its cultural, historical, and religious importance. These are just a few examples of global spiritual events that have been extensively studied. However, the Mahakam is unique in its formation of an ephemeral megacity, hosting over 100 million devotees within a few weeks. This is particularly significant for research, given technological advancements and heightened global interest in mass gatherings in the post-pandemic era. Real-time data collection using AI-driven crowd analytics, drone surveillance for security, and biomedical studies on large-scale sanitation and health infrastructure were at an all-time high. With climate change affecting river water levels, environmental researchers are keen to study the impact of millions of pilgrims on the Ganga's ecosystem. Additionally, the event provided fertile ground for behavioral economists studying donation patterns and for sociologists exploring caste and gender dynamics in faith-based gatherings. This academic research holds promise, as it is expected to offer deep insights into the logistical, cultural, social, and economic dimensions of the Mahakumbh. From Harvard to the London School of Economics LSE, and from Kyoto University to the Indian Institutes of Technology IITs, academics have been deeply engaged in unraveling the myriad aspects of this spiritual congregation. Economists and sociologists at LSE investigated the local economy and the livelihoods of millions of people, while Kyoto University examined how the Mahakumbh managed its environmental footprint and implemented sustainability measures. Harvard University documented academic data on crowd behavior and the measures taken to ensure public safety. Similarly, IITs, Indian Institutes of Management IIMs, and other esteemed Indian institutions engaged in participatory action research and practical action research. These studies aim to inform action, gather evidence for theoretical frameworks, and contribute to the advancement of knowledge in this field. The integration of cutting-edge technology at the Mahakumbh has opened up new research avenues. Current studies focus on human sciences, the psychological and emotional impact of collective religious experiences, and neurotheological research offering rich and novel insights for classroom teaching and experiential learning. Unlike many pilgrimages that primarily emphasize religious aspects, the Mahakumbh's transient city model has direct implications for urban planning, crisis management, and cultural anthropology. This research holds significant value for academics and researchers in the philosophy of education, as well as in teaching and learning methodologies within this field. It is also likely to attract interest from schools, university educators, policymakers, and prospective teachers by contributing to pedagogical innovations. Santosh Kumar Biswal is an associate professor at Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Ramadevi Women's University. Bhubaneswar Udham Chakraborty is an associate professor at School of Management, Presidency University, Bengaluru. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion is Aurangzeb irrelevant today? A case for moving forward without erasing history. We must choose our heroes wisely, grounded in cultural and civilizational values. Sunil Ambekar, the Prachar Pramukh of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh RSS, steps into the ring on March 19, 2025, and swings hard. Aurangzeb, he's not relevant. This statement has only fueled the chaos surrounding the issue. While RSS supporters are alleged to be flabbergasted, its detractors are said to have mixed reactions. Some welcome it, while others dismiss it as RSS ki sazish. Decode this: it isn't some weak plea to calm down, it's the RSS slamming the door on a 300-year-old corpse dictating India's pulse. Aurangzeb's crimes were real and bone-chilling, but Hindus have to be big enough to let his tomb rot where it stands. Not out of kindness, but because we have got a future to forge, and his dust isn't worth the sweat. Nanan, without doubt, Aurangzeb, the 6th Mughal Emperor 1658-1707, was a walking terror show. Take Chhatrapati Samhaj Maharaj, Shivaji's son, for instance. Captured in 1689, he was tortured beyond belief. His eyes were gouged out, his limbs sliced off, his body torn apart, all because he refused to bow to Islam. This was not a one-off atrocity. Remember Sikh Guru Tegh Bahadur's beheading in 1675, for defending Kashmiri Pandits from forced conversion. Then, he razed to the ground thousands of temples, including Kashi Vishwanath in Varanasi and Kesavadeo in Mathura. He imposed the Jizya tax, a humiliating shackle on non-Muslims, designed to bleed Hindus dry. These aren't just dusty history lessons, they're a gory testament to a man who spat on India's pluralistic soul. Nanan Ambekkar's line, not relevant, isn't dodging the blood, it's us towering over it. Bharat in 2025 has got bigger fish, economic muscle, tech leaps, and a global strut. A century-old tomb under the ASIS care doesn't dictate the nation's direction. The RSS isn't looking to battle ghosts, it's focused on building the future. The organization isn't just flexing muscle here, it's pushing harmony, duty, the Panch Parivardhan playbook. 5 big shifts: social cohesion, education reform, healthcare, justice, and environmental responsibility. And this isn't exclusive to any one group, it's for every Indian. The RSS has evolved beyond its old image, positioning itself as a national force with an inclusive outlook. Ambedkar's lessons remain relevant for all, including today's Muslims. History shouldn't be about glorifying invaders like Aurangzeb. This isn't about revenge, it's about waking up to what's ours. Nanan Hindus, we are resilient, not fragile. Rooted deep, standing firm. Dharma teaches us to recognize the divine even in adversity. Forgiveness is one thing, but erasing history is another. Tomb stays put fine by us. But it stands not as a tribute, but as a quiet reminder: we endured, we outlasted. Our temples are rising again, Our culture is thriving, our spirit is unshaken, no monument can change that. Aurangzeb's reign left deep scars. His truth must be told, not to stoke hate, but to nod at the grit of those who stood tall. Nan, it's time to choose our heroes wisely, grounded in cultural and civilizational values. Our legacy offers a vast array of figures who shaped our nation, including Chhatrapati Shivaji, Maharani Ahilyabai Holkar, Maharana Pratap, Chhatrapati Samhaj, Sant Kabir, Ustad Bismillah Khan, Ustad Zakir Hussain, Veer Abdul Hamid, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, Azim Premji, Veer Savarkar, Brigadier Muhammad Usman, Rani Abaka and Rani Nayaka Devi, among many others. Our history must honor those who built our soul, not those who sought to destroy it. Gopal Goswami, Ph.D., is a researcher, columnist, social worker. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: why children are the toughest cinema audience. Unlike adults, children cannot be swayed by trendiness, they just want a good story. Well-told oral narratives have a way of changing with the times. Like many timeless Indian epics, the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs has many versions. So the latest cinematic telling of the tale of a beautiful princess and an evil queen is par for the course, especially since the latest, supposedly woke, version reflects the current sentiment of the American film industry, if not that country's moviegoers. In short, this retelling had to happen and the adverse reaction to it too. But as the new live-action Snow White minus any little people in the title, although they are in the film, is heading apparently to a disastrous box office run in its home market and around the world, it would not be far-fetched to speculate it could be because the new version ignores the core viewership children and the fact that the enduring popularity of folk tales lies in their focus on timeless universal virtues rather than ever-changing political predilections and fads. The film's makers and supporters evidently also forgot that children are not inherently racist or woke and therefore do not decide what they like or do not like based on those two grounds. Millions of children across generations around the world who have watched the original movie and hummed the songs including this writer did not feel that Snow White was any different from themselves, unless a concerned parent, teacher, or other adult pointed it out. It is indeed grown-ups who transpose their own adult biases and preferences onto children in the vain belief that they know best and must tailor content accordingly. On the other hand, all children really want is an engrossing story, well told and visualized in an appealing manner. All successful children's films so far have adhered to that sacred mantra, and today's adults would be well advised to understand and accept it. Clearly Snow White's makers chose to ignore this. It would be interesting to know whether the filmmakers considered why, of all the many versions of the Snow White story that have been written and recounted since 1812, the 1937 film version has remained the most popular. Even the German brothers Grimm, who collated this story among many others from the folklore popular in 19th century Europe, watered down the more gory aspects and settled for a version that was close to what was finally animated in 1937. Folktales of yore in Europe were clearly meant for more resilient young minds than today's, given that many of the characters were more creepy than cuddly, like the witch in Hansel Gretel, and there are instances of violence like the wolf being killed and cut open by the hunter to rescue Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. What kids made of these acts of violence, especially towards wild animals, and whether it affected their attitudes towards it as adults is moot. The original stories collated by European folklorists over 200 years ago did not conform to modern norms of squeamishness, so they needed to be watered down in order to be passed on further. But the messages these stories communicate remained powerful, universal, and timeless. That is presumably why particular stories have been passed down the ages. All the more reason that the original messages should not be lost or altered at will, however noble the intention. The message of Snow White is not about becoming a people's princess and launching into political activism for a more just society. It is about the dangers of vanity and the importance of kindness, both of which have huge relevance in today's world. Why Snow White's beauty was greater than her stepmother's is because she had a good heart too. Diluting that premise with other concerns, woke or otherwise, is doing a disservice to the importance of those simple virtues. But that is precisely what is happening. The film has not been released in India yet, but people here are already primed on the main issues it has raised, none of which relate to vanity or kindness. Does it really matter to children anywhere whether the actress playing Snow White is Latina, not Caucasian? Would children think a Robin Hood type character is more appropriate than a prince? Most of all, do girls have to become firebrand crusaders for people's rights, for validation? The most unnecessary controversy, of course, is the opposing political views of Rachel Zegler Snow White and Gal Gadot her evil queen stepmother. The polarized discourse on Israel, Palestine, Hamas, and Gaza should have no bearing on successor No Toph Snow White's timeless story. Surely why should any film be impacted by the personal political views of the actors anyway, even if they insist on being vocal about whom or what they support everywhere? It would be facile to attribute the imminent failure of Snow White to anything other than the makers forgetting their prime objective to make a good children's film, particularly since it would be compared to the original, which has remained popular for 88 years. A little bit of research would have revealed that it still does not really matter if the protagonists are black, white, or polka dot, they simply have to enchant a child. Unlike adults, they cannot be swayed by trendiness. Besides, there are many other stories that expand upon other qualities of head and heart that children should imbibe. Snow White need not be every kind of heroine rolled into one. The entire canon of folk and fairy tales are on hand for that. And if children's filmmakers feel the need for a people's princess kind of character for our times, perhaps they should go ahead and create a new one instead of distorting an existing persona in the interests of modernizing or updating. A word here about happy endings too. That every children's story, whatever its medium, needs to end that way is a norm of our times. It presents a skewed picture of life to a cohort just beginning their journey. That there is sweetness in sorrow, that all wishes cannot be fulfilled, that gratification is neither instant nor guaranteed in real life are also lessons children have to learn. A gradual realization via stories is surely better than dumping it on them all at once later on. The author is a freelance writer. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion eroding respect, rising impunity a threat to national security and the men at borders. The attack on a serving colonel of the Indian Army and his son by Punjab police should have raised national outrage. About a decade ago, it would have, with the army itself leading the demand for justice. Today, there's hardly any visible reaction. It's a sad disgrace to our country's core security, one that has been largely overlooked by all concerned institutions. The attack on a serving colonel of the Indian Army and his son by Punjab police should have raised national outrage. About a decade ago, it would have, with the army itself leading the demand for justice. Today, there's hardly any visible reaction. This indicates trouble both internally and externally. It's not just the deterioration of state institutions, but also an indifferent society, without clear principles or expectations of right and wrong. Both aspects deeply affect national security in multiple ways. Nan. First, the incident itself. According to available footage, the police used extreme brutality on the officer and his son, all over a parking dispute. Whether or not the officer was rude to the police is unclear. Even if he used profanities, the police should have informed the nearest military authority about a possible detention. The Code of Criminal Procedure specifies that no armed forces personnel may be arrested by civilian authorities unless on serious charges like murder. In this case, the brutality of the violence passes all boundaries. Such cases may be increasing. Days later, on March 25, a paratrooper was picked up, assaulted after a verbal exchange with an inspector, who seemed inebriated, and detained. Even worse, the judicial authorities kept him under detention for 20 days. Another incident involved an army major in Odisha, who, with his fiancée copyright, went to a police station for help after being attacked by a group of youths, only to be assaulted and detained themselves. An army officer was assaulted in Kerala by cadets who suffered minor food poisoning in December 2023. Nan. The army has since called for a fair and honest time-bound investigation into the incident. The incident is unusual in Punjab, a state that usually respects the army, and recruits heavily from there. Whether the Agnipath scheme of short service has led to resentment is an open question, with 37,000 youngsters reportedly denied coveted jobs. But Odisha and other states are not high recruiting areas, indicating a deeper issue. The Punjab police's reputation during terrorism, with a constable claiming at least 80 encounters, is well documented. A surprising number of high encounters are also in Assam, a place of insurgency. Counterinsurgency is corrosive of policing, as evident in Pakistan, where the police system has nearly collapsed. That's a warning. Another aspect: recently, 2 Punjab police officers were given life sentences and fined Rs 2 lakh for killing an army Jawan in 1992, 32 years later. No wonder the army is asking for a quick and fair trial. The slow judicial process is a key aspect. The officer involved in attacking the colonel and his son has another case against him by a reputed oncologist. In Assam, a Supreme Court judgment on investigating 171 alleged encounter cases seems stalled over concerns it would demoralize police. Police nationwide are seen as goons in uniform rather than guardians of the law. There are fine officers, but they operate in a system lacking accountability and closely linked to local politicians. That's not good for them or the public. This rot needs to be stopped, requiring the energetic Home Minister to reform police impunity. Attempts at reform since the 1970s have done little. One suggestion is errant police personnel be sent to Siachen for training. A hard dose of reality might do them good. Nan. The armed forces themselves are changing. Their makeup shifts as society changes in terms of traditions and principles. Today's society has few remnants of core Indian traditions of respect and justice. It's about getting ahead by any means. However, the army maintains traditions and training that set high standards of bravery and valor. During the Kargil War, 26 young officers were killed and 66 injured. This is an army where officers lead from the front, and their men follow to the death. The same is true in Kashmir, where young officers are on the front lines. This is remembered during Kargil Diwas or in Bollywood movies, but forgotten otherwise. What about the commitments and values of senior officers? Once, officers commanded respect due to their reputation and dignity. That's not always true anymore. A huge shortfall in officers in 2023 indicates trouble. Now, the government doesn't share the data. Many mid-level officers opt to leave service rather than pursue prestigious higher courses. The army also needs to look inwards as socio-economic profiles change. Hey, race the bottom line. Courage to fight at 18,875 feet in freezing temperatures requires conviction that he is the best and bravest. The same goes for an Air Force pilot whose speed starts at 300 km per hour or a submariner with thousands of tons of seawater above him. This conviction in his worth, service, and country is vital for national defense and security. Without it, he's not good enough. This conviction requires a society that reflects some commitment. That society must have faith in institutions that reflect this absolute commitment. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's understandable given the differing duties of each institution, particularly police and judiciary. But some emulation would benefit all and improve national security. The key word is national. A soldier on the battlefield represents the nation. It better be worth it. Otherwise, he's just a man on a hill with a gun he's not sure he wants to use. The writer is a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, New Delhi. She tweets Kartha_Tara. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. The Maha Picture Maharashtra Gender Budget 202,526 a step towards equality or mere symbolic announcements. While the budget appears promising on paper, Maharashtra's past record in effective implementation of gender-based schemes raises concerns. One of the most significant provisions in this year's budget is the expansion of women's self-help groups SHGs and entrepreneurship programs, with increased financial support under Mahalakshmi Yojana and Mudra Yojana. The government has also promised greater access to credit and business incentives for women entrepreneurs, particularly in agriculture, small businesses, and urban startups. Additionally, new provisions have been made to enhance skilling programs, ensuring women receive industry-relevant training to enter the workforce. However, past experiences suggest that many of these initiatives remain concentrated in urban areas, leaving rural women with limited awareness and access to such schemes. The success of these provisions will depend on how well the government ensures rural outreach and overcomes bureaucratic challenges in loan disbursement and skilling programs. Healthcare remains another major focus area, with increased funds allocated for maternal and child health programs, menstrual hygiene awareness, and nutrition schemes under Mahatma Jyotiba Phule Jan Arogya Yojana and Poshan Abhiyan. The government has committed to strengthening public healthcare infrastructure, particularly in rural Maharashtra, to ensure that women receive quality medical services. While these measures are essential, the state continues to face a severe shortage of doctors and healthcare workers in rural districts, making it difficult for women in these areas to access timely medical assistance. Additionally, while sanitary pad distribution programs have been expanded, the taboo around menstrual health still prevents many young girls from utilizing these facilities. Without community-driven awareness initiatives, such schemes may not achieve their intended impact. Despite its progressive allocations, Maharashtra's Gender Budget 202526 has key gaps that need urgent attention. Issues such as gendered impact of climate change on women in agriculture, welfare provisions for transgender individuals, and robust fund utilization mechanisms remain largely absent. Rural women, especially those dependent on agriculture, are at the front line of climate change challenges, yet the budget lacks gender-sensitive climate policies that could help them build resilience. Additionally, Maharashtra has seen a rise in crimes against women, yet questions remain on whether the increased funding for safety measures like honest op centers and police response teams will be effectively implemented. Without strict accountability mechanisms and real-time monitoring, many of these schemes could suffer the fate of previous programs, good on paper, but ineffective in execution. The real test of this gender budget will not be its numbers, but its real-world impact on Maharashtra's women. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion Kunal's Karma and Why Free Speech Absolutism Will Not Work for India. Words must be weighed by adults before being spoken. And once the arrow is released, its consequences must be weighed. The archer cannot simply walk away with a shrug, without taking accountability over the ever-widening river of discord between India's right and left. A slender bridge of consensus appears sometimes, and then disappears. A few intellectually prominent voices from both sides propose that freedom of speech should be absolute and be applied universally. Nobody has the right to not be offended. Salman Rushdie, the master in the business of offending intentionally or not, once famously said. In the tide of petitions filed under Article 32 of the Constitution of India challenging criminal defamation under Sections 499 and 500 of the Indian Penal Code and Sections 1991 to 1994 of the Indian Code of Criminal Procedure. 1973 Ideologically wildly diverse personalities have found themselves stranded on the same side. Subramanian Swamy, Rahul Gandhi, and Arvind Kejriwal, politicians who have faced criminal defamation, have all contested the constitutionality of defamation. It inhibited their right to freedom of expression, they have argued. But the laws stand. And perhaps for the best. The recent episode involving stand-up comedian cum political activist Kunal Kamra presents an interesting case study. Kamra had mocked and celebrated when the previous Uddhav Sene-led administration in Maharashtra sent bulldozers to smash actor Kangana Ranaut's Mumbai office after she was vocal against the Mahavikas Aghadi government of Uddhav Thackeray's party, Congress, and the NCP. He has regularly attacked Hindutva politics and Hinduness. He, however, did not speak a word against BJP's Nupur Sharma being murderously hounded for a statement about Prophet Muhammad or the more than half a dozen people butchered for supporting Sharma. He physically heckled journalist Arnab Goswami on a plane. But when a Shiv Sena mob vandalized the event venue after Camera's abusive remark on their boss, the debate over free speech ignited again. Vandals and vigilantes have no place in a law-abiding society. But that does not bolster the case for absolute free speech. The First Amendment to the Indian Constitution under Article 19 was brought about by the first PM of independent India, Jawaharlal Nehru. The amendment introduced reasonable restrictions to the freedom of speech and expression, including those related to public order, friendly relations with foreign states, sedition, defamation, and incitement to an offence. Even then, the restrictions to free speech were opposed with much table-thumping and fist-waving by leaders from very diverse ideologies. Gandhians like Acharya Kripalani, socialists such as Jayaprakash Narayan, and right-wingers like Syama Prasad Mukherjee. Every champion of free speech, when he or she does it without duplicity, is well-meaning. But there are three fundamental reasons why a civilization state like Bharat cannot have absolute freedom of expression. First, simple concepts like race or language do not hold this nation together. The glue of this mind-boggling diversity of ethnicities and languages is a certain accommodative cultural and spiritual unity named Hinduness, whether one actively practices the faith or not. This civilization would not have survived for so many centuries if its diverse pieces clamored to offend one another just to establish free speech. Accommodation and mutual respect have achieved the unity, durability, and resilience of the Indian civilization. Second, absolute free speech would end up disproportionately favoring vocally aggressive, politically dominant, and sometimes violently assertive communities. It could dangerously marginalize peace-loving ones. One set of people would drive propaganda and intimidation in the name of religion or caste, leaving another set without even a legal recourse. Third, India has too many external and internal enemies working towards its demographic takeover and balkanization for it to leave a gaping legal loophole between speech and action. A Boiseboido approach is not ideal but pragmatic, given our historical and geopolitical realities. Bharat's ancient texts repeatedly stress owning accountability for one's speech. Kautilya's Arthashastra 3.18 prescribes fines for mithyarop false accusations and vakparusha abusive language. Manusmriti 8.13 emphasizes speaking up and speaking the truth in a court of law is one's duty. In Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 3.7.1, Uddalaka Uranai warns Yajnavalkya that his head would fall off if he did not know what he claimed to know. The powerful metaphor reminds us to be accountable for what we say. Words must be weighed by adults before being spoken. And once the arrow is released, its consequences must be weighed. The archer cannot simply walk away with a shrug, without taking accountability. Abhijit Majumdar is a senior journalist. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion: why U.S. entities still target India despite Trump. The reports by its intelligence community and Committee on Religious Freedom prove the deep state in the U.S. is down but not out. Yet three incidents highlight how much things remain the same, no matter how much people like Donald Trump try to change them. The first is the current U.S. president praising India's robust election process, with voter identity cards being biometrically verified. The second is the release of the annual report of the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, which, as usual, has criticized India, selectively citing instances of intimidation of minorities here. And the third, interestingly, is the 2025 Annual Threat Assessment of the U.S. Intelligence Community, released this Thursday. Although the main report pinpoints four countries: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea as the main threats to the U.S., there are two passing and unsubstantiated references to India as a state actor in the report. It thus appears to be cocking a snook at the current U.S. National Intelligence boss Tulsi Gabbard and FBI Chief Kash Patel. The forward states, a range of cyber and intelligence actors are targeting our U.S. wealth, critical infrastructure, telecom, and media. Non-state groups are often enabled, both directly and indirectly, by state actors, such as China and India, as sources of precursors and equipment for drug traffickers. Curiously, while the report elaborates on the Chinese government's direct, overt, and covert role in targeting the U.S., there are no further details on how India does so. And in the section titled Non-State Transnational Criminals and Terrorists, it outlines how international drug cartels are making illicit fentanyl and other synthetic opioids and smuggling them into the U.S., naming two Mexico-based gangs and also including Colombia and Ecuador as important centers. But then it gratuitously adds, China remains the primary source country for illicit fentanyl precursor chemicals and pill pressing equipment, followed by India. This casual India bashing is a characteristic of the U.S. deep state, so it would be facile to link the 2025 USGIRF report to the current Trump dispensation too. It is more like a defiant clenched fist from a now beleaguered deep state that has hitherto dominated the corridors of power. It is not certain that even someone as determined as Trump will be able to dismantle it or its agendas. The report, thus, sounds in substance not too different from those issued in the past. Given that USGIRF has two Muslim members, a common occurrence going by the list of commissioners in previous years, including one of Pakistani origin, Asif Mahmood, who is known for his anti-India posts and statements, the 2025 report recommendations are not surprising. It has reiterated its demand that India be designated a country of particular concern (CPC) for engaging in and tolerating systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom violations. Not that having nominally Hindu or Indian origin members will automatically ensure a balance either, judging by lawyer Anurima Bhargava, who was appointed during Trump 1.0 in 2018 for 3 years. And when the US denied Narendra Modi, then Chief Minister of Gujarat, a diplomatic visa and cancelled his existing tourist business visa on the recommendation of the USGIRF in 2005, the committee's chair was another Indian origin lawyer, Preeta D. Bansal. The 2025 report's motivated demands do not end with a CPC tag. Probably at the instance of Mahmood, it has called for targeted sanctions on individuals and entities, such as Vikash Yadav and Ra, for their culpability in severe violations of religious freedom by freezing their assets and or barring their entry into the US, and encourage the US Embassy and consulates to incorporate religious freedom into public statements and speeches. Taunt India. In India, the report even asks the US Congress to reintroduce, pass and enforce the Transnational Repression Reporting Act of 2024 introduced by the Trump-baiting Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff and co-sponsored by 11 others including Ilhan Omar, to ensure the annual reporting of acts of transnational repression by the Indian government targeting religious minorities in the US. It had been put into cold storage via referral to House committees. Besides asking for a review of arms sales to India, such as MQ-9B drones under Section 36 of the Arms Export Control Act, on the grounds that it may contribute to or exacerbate religious freedom violations, the 2025 report has demanded meetings with religious minority communities and faith-based civil society organizations during congressional delegations to India be requested and prioritized. Imagine if Indian MPs do the same when visiting the US. The consistently anti-Indian tenor of USGIRF, a federal government agency operating with the blessings of, if not directly under the US State Department, reiterates the belief that various arms of the US government have independent agendas, set long ago and perpetuated irrespective of who sits in the Oval Office. That would explain why, say, Indian-American liberal Bhargava, an Open Society fellow to boot, made it to the USGIRF even during Trump's first term. In fact, though she was part of the Department of Justice during the Obama administration and has an avowedly liberal track record of activism, she was still appointed to this bipartisan body, and her nomination was even mistakenly lauded by the then chair of USGIRF, the Tibetan academic Tenzin Dorje, who had consistently recorded his dissent on criticism of India regarding declining religious freedom. In the committee's reports issued during his tenure, the USGIRF stated in its 2019 report that since 2001, it has attempted to visit India in order to assess religious freedom conditions on the ground. However, on 3 different occasions seen 2001, 2009, and 2016, the Government of India refused to grant visas for a USGIRF delegation despite requests being supported by the State Department. As the Congress-led UPA was in power in 2009, refusal most certainly cannot be attributed to any Hindu nationalist bias. The era of Westerners sitting on judgment on the rest of the world is ending, but India's rising profile does not sit well with many of those used to a very different balance of influence, if not actual power. Hence, the insidious and egregious insertion of India's name as a state actor in the international illicit drug trade in a chapter on non-state actors without any corroborative evidence, and sustained calls by entities like the USGIRF to brand India as religiously intolerant. The targeting of India in these 2 official reports issued by arms of the US state structure will embarrass many in Trump's administration, but hopefully he himself will also realize this indicates the continuing malevolent influence of deep state operatives. It should leave India in no doubt, too, about the difficulty of dislodging old, entrenched interests. They still lurk and machinate not only in the labyrinths of government departments in Washington, D.C., but also in New Delhi. The author is a freelance writer. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Modi's Jan Aushadhi success delivering affordable healthcare for the common man. The promise of affordable, quality medicine for everyone is within reach, but only if we dare to confront the obstacles and build on the hard-won successes. India stands at a fascinating, if somewhat contradictory, crossroads in healthcare. We proudly wear the mantle of the world's pharmacy, supplying affordable generic medicines across continents, while back home, a fierce battle rages over the very soul of affordable medicine access for our own people. The Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana (PMBJP), or Jan Aushadhi scheme, is the epicenter of this conflict, a vital initiative aiming to slash the crippling burden of healthcare costs, yet facing stiff headwinds from powerful quarters. Its rapid expansion offers cause for celebration, but a closer look, particularly through a state-level lens, reveals crucial lessons we must heed if this quiet revolution is to transform India's health landscape. And let's not mince words, the sheer pace of Jan Aushadhi's growth in recent years is remarkable. From a sluggish start with a mere 80 kendras by 2015, the network has exploded, crossing the 15,000 mark by early 200 and 2,425, smashing government targets ahead of schedule. Think about it, at one point, a new government-backed generic drug store was opening roughly every 2 hours. And it wasn't just bureaucratic box filling where stores were being opened just for the sake of it, it translated into tangible relief for millions. Union Health Minister J.P. Nadda recently highlighted a staggering Rs 28,000 crore saved by patients purchasing medicines through these kendras, thanks to discounts ranging from 50 to an incredible 80% compared to branded equivalents. This expansion signifies a direct assault on the high out-of-pocket expenditure OOP on medicines that tragically pushes an estimated 7% of our population below the poverty line each year. While Jan Aushadhi sales, hovering around Rs 1,500 crore annually, are still a fraction of India's massive Rs 1.5 lakh crore pharmaceutical market, their impact punches far above its weight. Studies suggest every rupee spent in a Jan Aushadhi Kendra saves households around 6 rupees, a lifeline for families struggling to afford essential, often life-saving, treatments. This momentum, contributing to a significant drop in overall health OOP over the last decade, is something to champion as it represents a concrete step towards making healthcare a right, not a privilege dictated by the depth of one's pockets. Nanan, however, the national aggregate, impressive as it is, masks significant disparities on the ground. The distribution of Jan Aushadhi Kendras reveals a geographic lottery, a stark variation in access depending on where you live. While the milestone of having at least one Kendra in every district across India has been achieved, a significant improvement from just a few years ago, the population coverage varies dramatically. Kerala boasts impressive coverage with roughly one Kendra per 17,000 people, while states like Jharkhand lag significantly, with coverage closer to one Kendra per 270,000 citizens. This uneven spread means the scheme's benefits aren't reaching everyone equally, potentially leaving those in poorer, more remote states further behind. Encouragingly, efforts are bearing fruit. The focus on expanding into the 112 aspirational districts areas identified for accelerated development seems to be working. A significant proportion of these historically underserved districts now host multiple Kendras, suggesting that government incentives to establish outlets in challenging areas are having some effect. Yet, counterintuitively, a higher percentage of more developed districts still only have a single Kendra compared to aspirational districts. So, simply opening stores isn't enough. We need more nuanced, state-specific strategies that account for local healthcare ecosystems, including parallel state-run generic medicine schemes, and address the unique barriers in different regions. Ensuring equitable access requires more than just dotting the map. It demands a deep understanding of local needs and challenges. Nano discussion of Jan Aushadhi is complete without tackling the issue of quality. It's the persistent shadow hanging over the scheme, fueled by genuine concerns and, arguably, strategic FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt campaigns. Tragic incidents, like the child deaths in Gambia and Uzbekistan linked to Indian-made cough syrups down to earth, rightly raise alarm bells about regulatory oversight. India is awash with substandard drugs, a damning indictment of our current system. This reality provides fertile ground for opponents of Jan Aushadhi to sow doubts about the unbranded generics sold in these Kendras. The opposition is vocal and influential. Ironically, the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance IPA, representing the generics giants who once fought multinationals using arguments about patient access, now resists the expansion of unbranded generics that threaten their lucrative branded generic market. They, along with parts of the medical fraternity like the Indian Medical Association IMA, which fiercely opposed mandatory generic prescribing, often frame their resistance around quality concerns. Yet, organizations like the All India Drug Action Network AIDAN argue that commercial interests are the primary driver, fearing that widespread acceptance of cheap, unbranded generics will bust the myth that only renowned brands are of good quality. The PMBJP scheme mandates procurement only from WHO GM-certified manufacturers and requires batch testing in NABL-accredited labs. While implementation fidelity is always a question, dismissing the entire scheme based on the broader regulatory failures, which affect branded drugs too, seems disingenuous. The battle here is as much about market share and profit margins as it is about patient safety. Nanan Jan Aushadhi's journey so far offers critical lessons for strengthening affordable healthcare across India. Ignoring them would be a strategic blunder. First, regulatory overhaul is non-negotiable. The persistent doubts about quality, exploited by vested interests, stem from a fundamentally weak drug regulatory system. We desperately need to strengthen the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization (CSCO) and state FDAs, vastly increase the number of qualified drug inspectors, and enforce a zero-tolerance policy towards substandard and spurious medicines. Public trust, the bedrock of any successful public health initiative, can only be built on the assurance of consistent quality, rigorously monitored and enforced. Without this, the generic revolution will remain stalled. Second, perception management is paramount. The deep-seated belief, often encouraged by market forces, that higher price equals higher quality, needs to be systematically dismantled. Sustained, high-profile public awareness campaigns are essential to build confidence in generic medicines. Allowing the substitution of branded prescriptions with generic equivalents at Jan Aushadhi Kendras, a move fiercely resisted by the industry, is a crucial step in demonstrating therapeutic equivalence directly to patients. We must proactively shape the narrative, celebrating the quality controls in place and highlighting the immense savings potential. Third, expansion must be strategic and equitable. While celebrating the overall growth, the focus must intensify on plugging the gaps in underserved areas, lagging states, the remote districts, and the tribal belts. The success in aspirational districts shows that targeted incentives can work, but they need continuous refinement and monitoring to ensure they genuinely improve access for the most vulnerable. This requires moving beyond national targets to granular, district-level planning. Finally, sustained political will is critical. The accelerated growth of Jan Aushaddy under recent governments demonstrates what focused political commitment can achieve. This momentum must be maintained. It requires continued investment, not just in opening stores, but in strengthening the entire supply chain, ensuring medicine availability, addressing past stockout issues, and robustly overseeing quality. Nanan, the Jan Aushaddy scheme is more than just a network of pharmacies, it's a potent symbol of India's potential to deliver affordable healthcare to its citizens. Its expansion represents significant progress, saving crores and easing the burden on millions. But its journey is far from over. The challenges, geographical disparities, entrenched opposition, and the critical need for regulatory strengthening are formidable. Addressing these requires honesty, strategic clarity, and unwavering commitment. By learning the lessons from the ground up, tackling the quality concerns head-on, and ensuring equitable access, India can ensure that its role as the pharmacy of the world translates into tangible health benefits for all Indians. The promise of affordable, quality medicine for everyone is within reach, but only if we dare to confront the obstacles and build on the hard-won successes. Nan. Opinion: why PM Modi is the Sachin Dhoni of Indian politics? As we watch another IPL season unfold, and as India steps into a new phase of political and technological evolution, perhaps it's time we looked at leadership not as a dry, institutional affair but as a dynamic, human endeavour. As IPL 2025 electrifies the nation and India basks in the glow of a Champions Trophy victory, cricket is once again commanding the Indian imagination. At the same time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent interview with MIT computer scientist and podcaster Lex Fridman has gone viral, showcasing a thoughtful, calm, and layered conversation that spanned leadership, technology, Indian philosophy, and global geopolitics. These two seemingly different events, cricket fever and a cerebral conversation on statecraft, may seem unrelated. But they share one common thread: India's evolving idea of leadership. Over the past few months at Harvard, I've been immersed in exploring various dimensions of leadership: wartime leadership, frontline leadership, leadership for systemic change, and how character, decision-making, and values define leadership in crises and peace. I've listened to veterans, policymakers, CEOs, and social reformers share deeply personal lessons. But one evening, while taking a break from reading case studies and watching the calm Charles River, I tuned into the Lex Fridman podcast featuring PM Modi. Alongside, I was following the latest IPL match updates. Somewhere between PM Modi's composed reflections and the cracking sixes on the cricket field, my thoughts converged and I began reflecting on what defines leadership in the Indian context. The result is this piece. Sachin Tendulkar embodied an era defined by discipline, perseverance, and grace. His game was built on relentless hard work, calm temperament, and a near-spiritual focus. He followed the rules of the game with near reverence. Despite being a global icon, his humility remained intact. In the same way, Modi's political career is a testament to long-term vision, single-minded dedication, and rule-based democratic conduct. Whether it's his early years in the RSS, his tenure as Gujarat Chief Minister, or his role as Prime Minister, PM Modi has been a tireless worker, clocking 18 hour days, maintaining frugal habits, and never losing sight of his goals. His approach, like Sachin's, is less about drama and more about delivering consistent performance under pressure. Then comes the Dhoni factor. MS Dhoni brought a different energy to leadership: calm under fire, the instinct to finish strong, and the ability to lead both from the front and behind the wicket. He created a culture of winning, often letting others shine while he silently steered the ship. Think of PM Modi during critical moments: surgical strikes, Balakot, COVID-19 crisis management, G20 leadership. He exhibits the same measured resolve and decisive timing, much like Dhoni's iconic last over finishes. Even in electoral politics, PM Modi mirrors Dhoni's habit of winning across formats. Whether it's governance and policy-making test matches, fast-paced elections T20s, or international diplomacy level tours, he adapts to different terrains. This he does with equal ease, from delivering a high-octane rally in Bengal to addressing an AI summit in Paris, from facing spin wizards like President Trump on a disruptive track to confronting challenges like terrorism with strategic resolve. But this comparison isn't just a clever metaphor. It is deeply rooted in Indian civilizational thinking on leadership. The Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute Bori shared 5 timeless lessons from the Mahabharata that offer a blueprint for statecraft. PM Modi, and our Sachin Dhoni analogy, both mirror these principles. These 5 teachings from the Mahabharata converge with the best of what Sachin and Dhoni brought to cricket and what Modi brings to governance. Today's generation engages with politics differently. They seek authenticity, strategy, action, and inspiration, often through the lens of culture and sport. Analogies like these are not trivial, they are tools for public pedagogy. In the US, Barack Obama was often compared to Michael Jordan for his calm under pressure and game-changing charisma. Similarly, in India, cricket is more than a sport, it's a shared national metaphor. Comparing PM Modi to Sachin and Dhoni is not about idolization, but about making political leadership relatable and understandable through familiar symbols. Leadership is often viewed through the lens of individual greatness. But as Gandhi, Chanakya, and the Mahabharata remind us, true leadership is about systems, sacrifice, self-control, and service. This article is an attempt to celebrate those values not through theory, but through the stories and symbols that connect with a billion people. As we watch another IPL season unfold, and as India steps into a new phase of political and technological evolution, perhaps it's time we looked at leadership not as a dry, institutional affair but as a dynamic, human endeavour. And what better way to do that than through the lens of two cricketing legends and a Prime Minister who reflects the best of both. Abhishek Chaudhary is currently on a mid-career academic break, pursuing studies at the Harvard Kennedy School. He can be reached at @Abhis_Chaudhary. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Book excerpts. Ranthambore, much more than just a tiger habitat. Ranthambore Diary 9 Days 9 Cubs is a coffee table book written as an epistolary that follows the author's journey into the Ranthambore forest in his quest to sight the majestic resident tigers. Planning a 9-day trip to Ranthambore was a leap of faith. It is an intense experience, particularly with a young child. However, knowing our deep love for tigers in the forest, we were all looking forward to it. We were staying at the Oberoi Vaniavilas Wildlife Resort, my address in Ranthambore. Situated close to the park entrance, this luxury destination has just 25 rooms that make the most of the location, inspired by Ranthambore's history as the hunting ground of the Maharajas. For our first safari of the trip, we went towards Zone 1. On reaching Sultanpur Chowki, through our conversations with the forest officials there, we learned that some movements of the tiger had been observed by the morning safari teams around the area known as the Kali Pili Black and Yellow Water Body. We headed there, but as luck would have it, we could not catch any glimpse of a tiger. Through Guptaji Aniket and the new road, we were back in the Chowki area again. Once more, we missed sighting a tiger. Thereafter, we headed towards the Suka Talao or the dried up lake, and there we could see a sloth bear. As per recent surveys, the bear population of Ranthambore stands at around 50, so this sighting was a significant one. Sloth bears are very fond of termites and honey, which form the bulk of their diet. To satiate their hunger and craving for these two delicacies, bears have often been observed to travel long distances, covering an expansive area of the forest. Now, bears do not have any natural predators, but the tigers of Ranthambore have been known to make them their prey. A case in point is the tiger Ganesh, who recently hunted down a bear in one of his kills. Then again, there are multiple reports of bears turning the tables and driving away even female tigers. There was a fight between a sloth bear and T101 in Zone 5. It was so sudden that the foreign tourist who witnessed it couldn't take out his camera because he was frozen with fear. Somehow, the driver managed to click a picture with his phone. The next morning, we went to Zone 5 and found our vehicle at Gate 2 through which we were to enter. Right in front of our vehicle was another one that was being used by a Japanese wildlife photographer named Koki Yamada. For the past 2 years, he has regularly visited Ranthambore and taken many photographs. Tiger Lila made a rare sighting last year when we spotted her in the Berta area of Zone 4. On the subject of photographers, one of the interesting sights you might encounter in Ranthambore and other national parks are the various kinds of cameras. Long lens cameras can be spotted with a number of tourists keen to capture their animal sightings for posterity. They allow a better and clearer view of the animals, which are often some distance away. This is what it feels like to be a member of the paparazzi. I have heard from visitors who regret not being able to truly capture the majesty of these creatures with phone cameras and even basic DSLRs. A few good sightings might send you on a rather expensive shopping spree for camera gear. But I'd suggest renting prior to making a commitment. There is a lot to learn about wildlife photography and it's not for everyone. As soon as we entered through the gate, we saw pug marks belonging to possibly a male tiger, a trail which we followed, only to find it ending right before what is known as the Gular Key Quay. The footprints could only belong to the tiger T101, as he was the only one known to frequent the area. Thereafter, we proceeded towards the area known as Piligudi and, upon reaching it, were greeted with the alarm calls of frightened monkeys. These cries from langurs, spotted deer, and somber deer are often how alert guides and drivers at national parks can tell in which direction a tiger is moving. They will hear a call and race through the narrow paths that crisscross the forest, hoping to spot an animal. Sometimes, these efforts pay off. At other times, they will wait near known spots where tigers had been sighted in the past. Being on a safari can be extremely exhilarating, but it also requires a great deal of quiet patience. Enjoying the forest for its own sake, and deriving pleasure from other animals, such as birds, add much to the experience. One of the most fascinating animals in Ranthambore is, in fact, the tiny, friendly and extremely noisy Rufous Trippi. This bird fearlessly perches on safari vehicles and has a delightful call. It is black and orange, much like its most surprising friend the tiger. Unbelievably, this tiny creature is also known as the tiger dentist or the tiger toothpick. I have been fortunate enough to see them, but have not captured them yet. It is said that they have the temerity to sit before a tiger's gaping mouth and clean the apex predator's teeth. Tigers kill other birds but welcome their tiny synergistic allies in oral hygiene. These resourceful and intelligent birds are related to crows, are omnivorous and adaptable. On that occasion, we waited for a while at Piligudi, hoping to get a tiger sighting, but without a positive result. We carried on towards the Kachita Mata Mandir, where we came upon many villagers. As per their traditions, they had converged at the mandir on Navaratri Ekadashi, where Ajald rituals were carried out. It was quite unnerving to know that just days before our trip, on October 2nd, a villager named Babulal had fallen prey to the tiger T121 in this very area. After traversing through Kachita Chowki, we passed by Dhakda, People to reach an area known as Bakola. During the scorching summer months, this area is famous for tiger sightings, but we were unlucky that day. After waiting for a while and with no noticeable movement anywhere, we headed back towards Piligadi. Here, we once again crossed paths with Koki Yamada, who was photographing the area amidst the unending calls of monkeys and somber deer. The tigers, however, remained out of sight. You can get the book here. The above is an extract from Sundeep Bhutoria's book, Ranthambore Diary 9 Days 9 Cubs, following the author on 2 safaris into the heart of the jungle. The book features high-resolution pictures taken by Manjari Maheshwari that accompany the text, making for an exhilarating and immersive read. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Global Watch arrest of Marang Baloch exposes how weak is the mighty Pakistani state. The state's attempt to silence a prominent figure of the peaceful Baloch resistance has backfired, drawing greater attention to the plight of the Baloch people. Marang Baloch, the charismatic and fearless leader of the peaceful Baloch civil resistance, has been detained by Pakistani authorities alongside 16 other activists for protesting against the ongoing enforced disappearances in the province. As a key organizer of the Baloch Yakjeti Committee, an organization that has played a significant role in galvanizing grassroots mobilizations demanding state accountability, Baloch faces charges including directing terrorist activities, sedition, and rioting. Despite triggering widespread domestic and international condemnation, the Pakistani authorities remain largely unperturbed in their authoritarian suppression of peaceful Baloch demonstrations. In light of the recent escalation in insurgent attacks within the province, the latest wave of arrests and violent repression of protests can be seen as a deliberate attempt to divert attention from the state's own failures and shortcomings. Although the Pakistani state has escalated its efforts to silence Baloch this time, she has been under scrutiny for some time. A surgeon by profession, she has played a pivotal role in fostering the peaceful Baloch movement within a highly perilous environment. At just 32 years old, she has witnessed firsthand the severe abuses that the Pakistani state inflicts upon the Baloch people. In 2009, at the age of 16, her father, Abdul Ghaffar Lango, a laborer and political activist with the Balochistan National Party BNP, was forcibly disappeared. 2 years later, his mutilated body was discovered, showing signs of torture and gunshot wounds. In 2017, Baloch's brother also forcibly disappeared. Although he was released 3 months later following Baloch's vocal opposition to the authorities, her anger and activism endured, and she has since become the voice of many others who continue to suffer similar fates. Marang Baloch gained widespread recognition during the Baloch Yakjeti Committee's BYC March against Baloch genocide from Turbat to Quetta, the provincial capital, and ultimately to Islamabad, held between December 2023 and January 2024. The catalyst for this long march was the November 2023 killing of 24-year-old Taylor Baloch Molla Baksh by the Counter-Terrorism Department, which falsely characterized the incident as an encounter. His family, claiming he was in state custody at the time of his death, protested at Fida Ahmed Chowk in Turbat with his body for a week, but their efforts yielded no results. The BYC had originally emerged from the Bramsh Yakjeti Committee, formed in solidarity with and to seek justice for Bramsh, the 4-year-old daughter of Malik Naz, who was allegedly killed by state-backed death squads in May 2020. In response to the ongoing state abuses, including enforced disappearances, fabricated encounters, extrajudicial killings, and torture, the leadership of the Bramsh Yakjeti Committee chose to broaden its scope to address the broader plight of the Baloch people, renaming the organization as the Baloch Yakjeti Committee. The movement is spearheaded by the mothers, sisters, daughters, and half-widows of those who have fallen victim to these brutal state actions, without any accountability. The BYC has since organized a number of significant demonstrations, mobilizing people on an unprecedented scale in the history of the province, including the Baloch Raji Mukhi in Gwadar in July 2024 and the Baloch Genocide Remembrance Day in Dalbandan in January 2025. In response to the rise of peaceful civil resistance by the Baloch people, the Pakistani establishment, rather than addressing the long-standing grievances of the populace, has resorted to its usual tactics of obstructing, discrediting, and silencing the movement. The protests have continued despite state-enforced internet and network blackouts, arbitrary detentions, the use of water cannons, tear gas, and even live ammunition. Additionally, the state has launched an extensive disinformation campaign against the movement. The mainstream media, traditionally aligned with state narratives, has been complicit in linking the activists to insurgents, alleging that they are supported or manipulated by foreign entities. Marang Baloch herself has been targeted by malicious digital propaganda, with false claims that her father and brother were associated with insurgents. Furthermore, an image of her with a Norwegian journalist who interviewed her was circulated, suggesting foreign involvement in the movement. A fabricated audio recording was also spread, falsely claiming that Baloch was attempting to secure foreign funds for the Gwadar protest. A recurring element of the disinformation campaign involves misrepresenting the missing persons, whom the movement advocates for, as separatist militants. In one instance, a photograph of Bulish at a protest was altered to distort an image of a missing person on a poster behind her, replacing the image of Rafik Oman with that of Rafiq Basanjo, a suicide bomber allegedly claimed by the Baluchistan Liberation Army. The province of Baluchistan has endured immense deprivation and suffering due to the ongoing conflict between the Pakistani state and the long-standing armed insurgency. In addition to the systemic discrimination and exploitation imposed by the federal government, the Baluch people have faced relentless human rights violations by the state under the guise of counter-insurgency measures. The recent train hijacking and Noshki attack on security personnel by the Baluchistan Liberation Army highlight the complete failure of Pakistan's policies to address the insurgency and safeguard the Baluch population. Rather than confronting the fundamental issues surrounding its approach, the establishment has reverted to its familiar and convenient tactic of suppressing peaceful dissent to avoid addressing difficult questions. Dr. Marang Baluch is currently being held in Quetta district jail without any legal proceedings, denied access to her lawyer and family. Her cousin, Asma Baluch, has reported that the authorities are even preventing her family from delivering food and other necessary items to her. International human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Frontline Defenders, have raised concerns about this situation and called for her immediate release. It is evident that the state's attempt to silence a prominent figure of the peaceful Baluch resistance has backfired, drawing greater attention to the plight of the Baluch people. It is crucial that the establishment reassess its approach and put an end to the egregious practices that have fueled the insurgency and caused immense suffering to the Baluch population. The writer is an author and a columnist. His X-handle is Aaron Anand Live. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's view. Opinion decoding the Mega PSU revival under PM Modi. Turning around loss-making PSUs is not merely about restructuring them or infusing fresh capital. Bold and drastic measures are often paramount. State-owned telecom operator Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited (BSNL) has recorded a net profit of Rs 262 crore for the December 2024 quarter, marking its first quarterly profit in 17 years. This is a significant turning point for the company, with the revival happening thanks to its service expansion, cost-cutting measures and growing subscriber base. BSNL saw revenue growth of 14.18% across its mobility, fiber-to-the-home FTTH, and leased line services compared to the same period last year. The telco's subscriber base also climbed from 8.4 crore in June 2024 to 9 crore by December 2024. This December quarter profit is the first since 2007. Additionally, the company slashed finance costs and overall expenditure, reducing losses by over Rs 1,800 crore compared to the previous year. Its EBITDA earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization doubled in the last 4 years, reaching Rs 2,100 crore in FY 2023-24. BSNL has been enhancing customer offerings with services such as national Wi-Fi roaming, Buy TV free entertainment for mobile users, IFTV for FTTH customers, and India's first private 5G connectivity for mining. The company is now focused on nationwide 4G rollout. Of 100,000 planned towers, 75,000 have been installed and close to 60,000 commissioned. The aim is to have all towers operational by June 2025. With continued revenue growth and controlled expenditures, BSNL aims to sustain profitability and further strengthen its position in India's telecom sector. Turning around loss-making PSUs is not merely about restructuring them or infusing fresh capital. Sometimes, the decision to shed flab is not enough. Bold and drastic measures are often paramount. In that context, the government's bold move to exit Air India completely in 202,122 speaks volumes about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's mantra of minimum government, maximum governance. After being sold to the Tata Group, Air India shaved off its losses by 60% or to Rs 4,444.10 crore in FY24 over the previous year. The airline had reported a loss of Rs 11,387.96 crore in FY23. The Tata Group further consolidated its aviation presence with the merger of AirAsia India X Connect with Air India Express and the merger of Vistara with Air India. Air India recorded its highest consolidated annual operating revenues of Rs 51,365 crore in FY24, up 24.5% over FY23, driven by growth in capacity to 1059 million available seat kilometers, which was 21% or higher over the previous year. The privatization of Air India by the Modi government has worked wonders. Don't forget, this air carrier was making losses at the rate of Rs 20 crore a day, prior to its privatization in 2022. It also saw an improvement in passenger factor to 85% or against 82% in FY 200 and 2223. During FY 200 and 2324, 40.45 million passengers were flown by operating 800 daily flights, including 55 domestic and 44 international destinations. Vistara operated its last flight under its banner on November 11, 2024, and its operations were merged with Air India on November 12, 2024. Sharing data on the improvement in operational parameters since January 27, 2022, when the government handed over the ownership and management of the airline to the Tatas, Air India said it had been able to double its average daily revenue by raising aircraft capacity by 27% to 100, increasing flights by 30% and flying 72% or more passengers by 2023, within just 1 year of privatization. The airline, which aims to be a globally recognized brand in the next 5 years, has also focused on its international expansion and added 16 new routes and increased frequencies on as many as 9 other routes. This allowed it to increase its weekly international flights by 63%. The airline was able to clock the best OTP across all airlines in 2023, with 90.98% of its flights taking off or departing on time. This stood at an average of 70% in 2021. Another issue of concern among passengers was delay in response from customer care. The airline has more than doubled the manpower at its call centers, thereby reducing the average wait time by almost 90%. It has also been able to clear a backlog of a whopping 10 lakh aged or legacy refunds, between 2022 and 2023 alone. PM Modi often says the government has no business being in business, and selling Air India to the Tatas was a brilliant move, endorsing exactly that. Air India has seen significant growth in employment opportunities, with over 7,500 new employees, both flying and ground staff, having joined the company since privatization. So, far from losing jobs, thousands have joined the company. Air India has been in the process of acquiring 470 aircraft from Boeing and Airbus for its fleet expansion at an estimated cost of $70 billion. Coal India Ltd SIL, owned by the Union government, is yet another example of how the Modi government has truly lived up to its promise of minimum government, maximum governance. The company's performance has seen a sharp turnaround in the last few years. Talking of PSBs, SBI, the banker to every Indian, has huge strengths like its branch network of over 22,000, a strong brand recall and ammunition like comfortable liquidity buffers. The average balance in a savings account in SBI is 3 times higher than the nearest competition, which effectively means that the average saving account balance improved to Rs 17 lakh crore in June 2024 from Rs 12 lakh crore in March 2020. Let us turn the clock back to 2012. The bank had a net profit of just Rs 1,583 crore in the April-June quarter of 201,112 FY12 fiscal. The sharp jump in base in 2012 was attributed to inability of corporates and other borrowers to repay the loans on time, mainly on account of pathetic performance of the economy under the erstwhile Congress regime. Now circle back to 2025. The percentage of gross base or non-performing assets of SBI was barely 2.07% in Q3 FY25 from 2.42% in Q3 FY24. On a QoQ basis, too, the figure saw an improvement, versus the 2.13% figure in Q2 FY25. The net NPA figure in Q3 FY25 came in at 0.53% vs 0.64% YoY. Credit growth at 13.49% YoY in Q3 FY25, with domestic advances growing by 14.06% YoY and with gross advances crossing Rs 40 lakh crore, is a stellar endorsement of Modinomics and how it has reinvigorated the banking landscape, including the massive turnaround of India's biggest public sector lender. SBI. CASA ratio stands at 39.20% as of December 31, 2024. SBI, for the quarter ended December 2024 Q3 FY25, reported a sharp 83% year-on-year YoY surge. Indiana standalone net profit to Rs 16,891 crore. The net interest income for Q3 stood at Rs 41,445.51 crore, up 4% YoY. The provision coverage ratio PCR at 74.66% improved by 49 bps YoY. Slippage ratio for 9MFY25 improved by 8 bps YoY and stands at 0.59 per cent. Slippage ratio for Q3 FY25 improved by 19 bps YoY and stands at 0.39%. Credit cost for Q3 FY25 stands at 0.24 per cent. PCR with ACA is 91.74 per cent. ACA represents accounts to the extent fully provided and transferred to a separate head called Advance Under Collection Account ACA with a clear purpose of cleaning the balance sheet. The balance in ACA as of December 31, 2024 is Rs 1.75 lakh crore. Central public sector enterprises CPSEs under the Modi government have seen a tremendous 150% growth. Indiana, their combined net profit from Rs 1.29 lakh crore in FY14 to Rs 3.22 lakh crore in FY24. That figure was Rs 2.18 lakh crore in FY23. The top 5 CPSEs with the highest net profits were Oil Natural Gas Corporation Ltd, Indian Oil Corporation Ltd, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Ltd, NTPC Ltd, and Coal India Limited. Dividends declared by CPSEs in FY24 rose 16.3% to Rs 1.23 lakh crore compared with Rs 1.05 lakh crore in FY23. For example, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited HAL saw its market valuation skyrocket by 14.52% in merely 5 years, rising from Rs 17,398 crore in 2020 to Rs 2.7 lakh crore as of March 2025. The company is virtually debt-free. It has a healthy interest coverage ratio of 240.58. The company has been maintaining an effective average operating margins of 24.99% in the last 5 years. As of December 2024, HAL's order book stands at approximately Rs 1.33 lakh crore, with the potential to reach Rs 2.5 lakh crore by FY26, driven by orders for aircraft like the Tejas Mk1A and helicopters like the Prachand. The capital employed by CPSEs also rose by 119% to Rs 38.16 lakh crore on March 31, 2023, compared to Rs 17.44 lakh crore on March 31, 2014, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said. During the 1999-2004 period of the NDA regime, the PSU index soared over 300%, vastly outperforming the BSE Sensex 70% gain. In comparison, under UPA 1,200,409, the PSU index rose by 60%, but this was only half the growth rate of the Sensex. During 200,914 UPA 2, the PSU index declined by 6%, while the benchmark rose by 73%. Despite volatile markets, the 10 biggest market cap contributors to the BSE between March 17, 2025, and March 24, 2025, were Hindustan Aeronautics HAL, State Bank of India SBI, Life Insurance Corporation LIC, Indian Railway Finance Corporation IRFC, NTPC, Oil Natural Gas Corporation ONGC, Power Grid Corporation of India, Coal India, Bharat Electronics, and GAIL India, whose market capitalization surged by anywhere between Rs 49,155 crore and Rs 15,353 crore, each. In the last 10 years, as of May 2024, PSUs have been the biggest outperformers. Bharat Electronics Limited Bell tops the chart, with nearly 16 times returns, followed by ITI with 15.5 times returns. Others include NBCC India, SJVN, and Hindustan Petroleum Corporation HPCL with 7.9 times, 5.8 times and 5.1 times returns, respectively. In percentage terms, Bell's returns stand at a whopping 1,488%, followed by ITI at 1,449%. For NBCC, SJVN, and HPCL, the returns are between 689% and 410%. Under the leadership of PM Modi, PSUs are thriving, benefiting significantly from the culture of professionalism infused in them along with increased operational freedom. The Modi government's focus on capital expenditure has also helped. Management incentives such as sharpening of performance-linked bonus, capital management guidelines on dividends, buybacks, etc., and calibration of the disinvestment strategy have played a key role in improved performance of the CPSEs. GNPA's gross non-performing assets in PSBs have fallen to decadal lows of less than 3.2% and profits are at record highs, even as the push to financial inclusion brings formal banking to every corner of the country. The total paid-up capital of all CPSEs jumped 155% to Rs 5.05 lakh crore on March 31, 2023, as compared to Rs 1.98 lakh crore on March 31, 2014. Total gross revenue of CPSEs in FY23 was Rs 37.90 lakh crore against Rs 20.61 lakh crore in FY14, an 84% growth. The total contribution of CPSEs to the exchequer in taxes and dividends was Rs 4.58 lakh crore in FY23, a 108% jump over Rs 2.20 lakh crore in FY14. The net worth of CPSEs also increased from Rs 9.5 lakh crore on March 31, 2014, to Rs 17.33 lakh crore on March 31, 2023, an increase of 82%. A stellar example of how PSUs and PSBs under the Modi government have staged a handsome turnaround is SBI, with the bank's net profit over the past 4 financial years significantly surpassing the cumulative profits of the previous 64 years. In the last 4 years, SBI has earned a net profit of Rs 1.63 lakh crore. The same for the 64 years prior to that was only Rs 1.45 lakh crore. Currently, SBI's run rate is a smart Rs 17,000 crore worth of net profit every quarter. The bank has improved on the productivity front as well, with profit per employee growing by nearly 6 times to Rs 30 lakh in the last few years, clearly endorsing the fact that PSUs and PSBs under the aegis of the Modi government have had a brilliant turnaround in more ways than one. The author is an economist, national spokesperson of BJP and author of the best-selling book The Modi Gambit. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan. Opinion. The left's influence over Indian institutions, the permeation of colleges, bureaucracy, the judiciary, and the government by the Indian left is a narrative of ideological victory and, more, overreaching by every standard. India's institutional terrain across academics, bureaucracy, judiciary, and executive clearly matches left-wing philosophy. The result of a decades-long process in which the Indian left, underpinned by its intellectual affinity with the Soviet Union and political alliance with the Indian National Congress, passes a socialist thread through the fabric of the nation in India. The result is a set of establishments indifferent to public opinion, westernized in their point of view, and against the Hindu ethos that has historically shaped India's cultural identity. To appreciate the hold the left exerts on institutions in India, one has to go back to the middle of the 20th century when the Soviet Union became a North Star for anti-colonial activity around the world. Freshly independent in 1947, India was no exception. Originally founded in 1925, the Communist Party of India CPI struck a chord with politicians and thinkers vexed with colonial capitalism. Although the CPI never achieved political dominance, its intellectual influence increased in part thanks to a symbiotic cooperation with the Indian National Congress, particularly under Jawaharlal Nehru's guidance. Socialist Nehru valued the Soviet scheme of central planning and state-yield development, a vision that came to be seen in India's five-year plans and the establishment of a massive state sector. This fit was not merely rhetorical. As noted in India after Gandhi 2007 by historian Ramachandra Guha, Nehru's administration welcomed Soviet consultants and technical knowledge, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, creating an intellectual environment in which socialism was identified with progress. Though the Congress had a wide spectrum, it relied heavily on this framework, embedding a statist, redistributionist ethic into the policy-making and administrative system. This provided the foundation for what critics refer to as a leftist ecosystem, a network of academics, officials, and judges who considered themselves as protectors of a secular, socialist India, contrary to its conventional moorings. Though founded in 1961, the NCERT National Council of Educational Research and Training was charged with shaping educational curricula, but under apparently independent India, it turned into a means of ideological engineering. Under several Congress-led governments, the Council's textbooks strongly relied on a Marxist historical theory that minimized India's dharmic heritage based on Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism in call of a story that stressed class conflict using colonial statistics meant to build atrocity literature against the colonized, and some colonial victimhood, ignoring the scores of Islamic invasions and treating indigenous Indian history as non-existent or negligible. Consider, for example, Hounsert. Textbooks treat ancient India. In her book Sati Evangelicals, Baptist Missionaries, and the Changing Colonial Discourse 2016, Meenakshi Jain and other academics contend that these textbooks constantly marginalized the philosophical and cultural roles of Hindu civilization, depicting it as static and backward. The attention turned to Mughal and British epics instead, usually seen through a lens of economic exploitation rather than cultural exploitation. Critics argue that this was not an error but a conscious effort to cut young Indians from their dharmic foundations, thereby substituting pride with a sense of historical inferiority. Beyond school textbooks, universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University JNU became strongholds of Marxist philosophy and groomed waves of scholars, public servants, and political leaders immersed in socialist ideals. Creating an intellectual elite that gazed outward rather than inward, as sociologist André Betaille noted in Universities at the Crossroads 2010, these institutions usually gave Western theoretical frameworks Marxism, post-colonialism, and secularism precedence above indigenous knowledge systems. The left's operational arm became the bureaucracy embodied by the Union Public Service Commission UPSC, while academia furnished the intellectual scaffolding. Although the Indian Administrative Service IAS was meant to be apolitical, its recruitment and training procedures have long reflected a bias towards urban, English-educated candidates with a progressive bent. The UPSC syllabus, with its emphasis on modern history, political theory, and economic planning, naturally favored those schooled in far-left paradigms, many of whom emerged from the same university ecosystems. This has had tangible results on citizens' lives. According to political scientist Pratap Bhanu Mehta in a 2019 article for the Indian Express, the bureaucracy frequently behaves as a self-perpetuating elite cut off from the rural, religious, and vernacular situations prevailing in India. Suggesting state control over market forces or community customs, policies like land reforms and industrial licensing, hallmarks of the Nehruvian era, bore the imprint of socialist doctrine. Critics contend still that the IAS is a keeper of a perspective that values Western-style governance above India's pluralistic ethos, therefore putting it out of sync with a people more and more assertive about their Hindu identity. The judiciary has not escaped this ideological tide either. Enacted in 1950, India's constitution is a liberal one, but its interpretation has frequently leaned to the far left, especially following the 42nd Amendment in 1976 expressly introducing socialist into the preamble. Landmark rulings such as the 1973 Kesavan Dabarati case, which founded the basic structure doctrine, codified a devotion to equity and welfare that corresponded with socialist values. The Supreme Court and High Courts have relied upon this model over time to support extensive state intervention from nationalization in the 1970s to affirmative action policies in the decades since. In the Indian Supreme Court and Politics 1980, legal authority Upendra Baxi contends that the judiciary's posture mirrors the impact of a left-leaning legal fraternity, several of whom were influenced by the same academic streams. But critics note a contradiction. While the judiciary promotes socialism, it sometimes seems tone-deaf to public opinion, especially on subjects like temple administration or religious rights, where Hindu organizations believe their culture is disregarded. Traditionalists who saw the 2018 Sabarimala judgment as an imposition of secular values over dharmic practice were outraged over the decision that let women of all ages enter the shrine of the meditating deity. Hindus worship living deities, and it is the belief of male and female devotees of Ayyappa that he must only be worshipped by men, children, and older women in the Sabarimala temple in particular, while others may seek him out in scores of other temples. The influence of the left at the level of government has been both direct and indirect. Ruling for more than 5 decades post-independence, the Congress formalized a top-down, westernized model of development. Think dams, factories, and urban planning that sometimes neglected indigenous practices which were in harmony with nature. Until dissolved in 2014, a Soviet-inspired body, the Planning Commission, best symbolized this strategy. Even coalition governments, including those headed by the left front in states like West Bengal and Kerala, reinforced this paradigm, blending Marxist rhetoric with electoral pragmatism. This outward-looking attitude that admires European socialism or American liberalism has distanced the government from the Hindu ethos of India. Ignoring Hinduism's role as a unifying cultural thread, the left's contempt for religious nationalism has transformed Hinduism into a backward force, according to political commentator Swapan Dasgupta in Awakening Bharat 2021. The outcome is a political organization that frequently uses a language both literally and symbolically strange from the masses it purports to represent. Most upsetting is the view that the leftward influence has undermined the dharmic foundations of India, hence creating a people who feel ashamed of their legacy. Concerted efforts to de-Hindus India are seen in the NCERT's curricular decisions, the secular bias of the bureaucracy, and the judiciary's interventions. Advocates of this approach, including historian Sitaram Goel in How I Became a Hindu 1982, claim that the left, cooperating with Congress, presented India's past as a series of caste discrimination and dogmatism, thereby obscuring its philosophical breadth and civilizational accomplishments. In the past as present 2014, left-leaning academics such Romila Thapar insist that their criticism of Hindu orthodoxy was intended to free, not insult, and so help to construct a modern, equal nation. Still, as public opinion changes, shown by the BJP's rise since 2014, the disconnect between these institutions and the voters points to a reaction against years of leftist dominance. The permeation of colleges, bureaucracy, the judiciary, and the government by the Indian left is a narrative of ideological victory and, more, overreaching. Founded in Soviet ideal and Congress patronage, its socialist leanings have shaped an institutional elite that sometimes appears aloof, westernized, and dismissive of India's Hindu ethos. It is evident that as India changes, its institutions have a reckoning that will challenge their capacity to reflect rather than to determine the soul of the country, as is wont in a democracy. Modernization is not a contradiction to Dharma, a civilizational existence that has constantly revised its laws and doctrines to time and society in Smritis and Sahitya. The placing of it as such by the left is a disingenuous repetition of its action against Christianity in its many Western homes. It manages to confuse and subvert a population whose mindset has been reinforced through various institutions across ages, and thus, a call to revising the tenets it is based on is getting louder as information flow is democratized. It remains to be seen whether it is acknowledged in time, because the far-left status quo has long been left behind. Arun Ghosh comes with a background in law. He is a contributing author covering foreign affairs and culture. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS 18's views. Nan. Right mind why India must reconsider NJAC. The National Judicial Appointments Commission, which the Supreme Court axed in 2015, needs to come back. Dismissing it outright for being imperfect was a missed opportunity for meaningful reform. The judiciary is often regarded as the guardian of democracy, but at present, some concerns over its working have come into sharper focus. The latest controversy involves Justice Yashwant Varma of the Delhi High Court, who has become the face of this crisis. A video surfaced allegedly showing large sums of cash at his residence, with no clear explanation. The public outcry that followed prompted the Chief Justice of India to take action, leading to the formation of a 3-judge inquiry panel. As a result, Varma has been relieved of judicial duties and repatriated to the Allahabad High Court. However, this issue extends beyond one individual. It is a stark reminder of the systemic challenges that have plagued the judiciary for years. Noted commentator, author, and scientist, Dr. Anand Ranganathan on X, formerly Twitter, did not hold back, and why should he? On September 21, 2023, he dropped some hard truths. Only 12% of High Court and Supreme Court judges are women. Not one of the 25 High Courts has a female Chief Justice, and the Supreme Court has never had one either. He went further, pointing out that only 3% of these judges are Dalits, while the SC has never had a judge from the scheduled tribes. His concern is clear: if reservations are considered a moral obligation in other sectors, why is the judiciary exempt? He calls it hypocrisy. In another post, he laid out further troubling statistics: 47 million cases pending, just 20 judges per million people, 21% of judicial posts empty, 50% of High Court judges related to judicial members, and yet this Supreme Court judges admitting to corruption. Yet, the power to appoint judges remains solely with the judiciary. Ranganathan's assessment is blunt: the judiciary is in crisis, and the collegium system lies at the heart of the problem. He considers the collegium system, where judges pick their own replacements, to be highly problematic. He points out that India remains the only country to let unelected folks build their own clique with no one watching. The National Judicial Appointments Commission (NJAC), which the Supreme Court axed in 2015, needs to come back. It wasn't flawless, but it was envisaged to better the judicial system. The NJAC had proposed 6 people, 3 judges, the law minister, and 2 eminent persons. Any 2 could veto a pick, forcing real discussion. However, the Supreme Court rejected it, citing concerns over independence. Independence from what scrutiny regional balance within the judiciary is virtually non-existent. Some high courts go years without a single judge being elevated to the Supreme Court, leaving experienced and capable judges waiting in vain for recognition by the collegium. Community representation is another concern. Unless the collegium takes corrective action, the Supreme Court may soon be without a Muslim judge. Supersessions remain a contentious issue. Justices Dhalia and Purdiwala were appointed to the Supreme Court ahead of numerous senior judges. Dhalia was elevated over 23 Chief Justices, while Purdiwala was chosen over 25 High Court judges. The collegium defends such decisions in the name of merit, but the lack of transparency continues to raise questions. Mukul Rohatgi, former Attorney General of Bharat, on March 25, 2025, told the press, "The will of the people is expressed in the parliament. Parties cutting across party lines came together for NJAC." He's not wrong. The NJAC had support from all sides, unlike the collegium system, which operates behind closed doors. Rohatgi also referred to the Constituent Assembly debates specifically from May 24, 1949 WHERE. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar stated that the President should appoint judges after consultation with the Chief Justice of India, not with concurrence. The framers of the Constitution did not intend for the judiciary to have unchecked control over appointments. According to Rohatgi, the collegium system amounts to a power grab. He had argued in favor of the NJAC in court and maintains that the 2015 verdict striking it down was deeply flawed. The late Arun Jaitley, former law minister and a strong advocate of the NJAC, saw it as a necessary reform in a system where judicial independence was being used as a shield against accountability. Rohatgi said Jaitley could call a spade a spade. Damn right. The collegium system is not just opaque, it is virtually untouchable. Over 50 million cases remain pending, while high courts operate with a 40% or shortfall. Indiana judges due to ongoing disagreements between the collegium and the government. Justice is being delayed, caught in bureaucratic deadlock, yet the collegium remains preoccupied with its internal workings. Concerns over judicial accountability are not unfounded. Instances of judges appearing disinterested, arriving late, or even dozing off in court have been captured on camera. Nepotism remains a persistent issue, with the relatives of former judges often securing prestigious appointments. The collegium defends its authority in the name of judicial independence, but independence from whom the very people the judiciary is meant to serve. Other democracies have adopted more transparent selection processes. The United Kingdom and South Africa, for instance, have independent judicial commissions, yet their courts function effectively under oversight. India is no exception in requiring reform. Legal experts have long criticized the collegium system. Former Attorney General K.K. Venugopal described it as a closed system that breeds nepotism and kills merit. He said the NJAC's mix of voices, judges, government, civil society, would have picked better people. The late Ram Jethmalani was an outspoken critic, calling the collegium a disaster and advocating for the NJAC to curb judicial insularity. Even Justice Josti Kelameswar, the sole dissenter in the 2015 NJAC ruling, trashed the collegium as opaque and said the NJAC wasn't the enemy, it was a way to stop insider deals. It's not just about appointments. Professor Ranganathan of the JNU has adduced numbers: 47 million pending cases, 21% of judicial posts vacant, only 20 judges per million people. That's a system on its knees. And the corruption Supreme Court judges have admitted it themselves. Yet the collegium keeps the cycle going, appointing more of the same. The NJAC could have broken that logjam by bringing in more voices: judges, government, regular folks. It wasn't about handing the judiciary to politicians, it was about making judges answerable for their picks. On Monday, Vice President and Rajya Sabha Chairman Jagdeep Dhankar met with JP Nadda and Mallikarjun Kharge to discuss judicial accountability and the NJAC Act. Dhankar also convened a meeting of all party leaders to address the fallout from the Varma case. These discussions signal the gravity of the situation. The issue can no longer be ignored. The Varma episode serves as a wake-up call. The system is under strain, and the collegium is not the solution. The NJAC, despite its flaws, offered a more balanced approach, bringing in diverse perspectives, introducing checks and balances, and fostering trust in judicial appointments. It was not perfect, but rather than scrapping it entirely, improvements could have been made, such as refining the selection of eminent persons or allowing the Chief Justice to break deadlocks. Dismissing the NJAC outright for being imperfect was a missed opportunity for meaningful reform. Nanyavraj Pakarna is an independent journalist and columnist. He tweets with Eovraj Pakarna. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Nan.